Hello, and welcome to the Story Engine Workshop series. We are the Story Engine. My name is Peter Chikowski. I'm the designer of the Story Engine deck, Deck of Worlds, and Lore Masters deck, and I'm joined by Maroki Tong. Hello, Maroki.
Hello. I like how I don't know if you know this, but you were pointing off the screen the other way. There's only don't know our mirror images and where our hands work. I'm Maroki. I am the CEO of the Story Engine. I keep the engine going by doing all the fun things like making sure your decks swim across the water accordingly on a boat and arrive at their destinations. I do all the fun behind the scenes calculations of things, and I promise you it's more fun than it sounds. Or at least if any of you are data junkies out there, I know most of you guys out there today are writers and creatives. I'm a creative myself, but I also really like my numbers. It's probably being raised for years by an engineer father. But we are the Story Engine, and for those of you who join us regularly, you're probably noticing a gap that is beside me today. And that is because our lovely Eric is actually on a plane to LA for not Story Engine related activity, but I think something that might tickle you folks out there who like movies and creatives. He has this thing with his friends for the last 20 years where once a year they all gather together and watch movies for 24 hours, but they all end up being like really fringe, rare things because oftentimes they're like they have this whole parameter where only one person, like it has to be a movie where like no more than one person has watched it. So it has to be these it can't be blockbusters, it can't be mainstreams, it can't be all this stuff. So he's off doing that. I don't really know as we get older whether watching movies for 24 hours is actually good for our health, but here we go. Here we have it.
Yeah, and we are losing Eric to fly out to LA. However, we have a special guest coming in from LA to join us this week.
I was waiting for that segue. I actually was feeling like that was like, come on, pick up the setup.
We got it. We got one in. We got one out. It's Thunderdome rules. But actually, it's a really exciting episode today because if you haven't joined us before for one of these, we are doing the Story Engine Workshop series. It's a workshop series where we bring on different creative professionals to talk about their creative process, share their tips and tricks about a specific aspect of what they create and how they create it, and then we actually do some live creation with them in front of you, where you have a chance to see the creative process in action, see how certain creative brains approach that process, see them discuss those creative choices where they see a lot of potential for storytelling or world building, where they think like, well, maybe we won't explore that avenue. And it's just always such a rich conversation. We've had a really wonderful run of guests. And today's guest is one that we're particularly excited about because we are being joined by George Strayton. George is a writer, a producer, and a director. He got his start on the TV series Xena, Warrior Princess, and Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, but his credits include films and TV shows for Paramount, Disney, Netflix, and others. And even before going into entertainment in television and film, he was actually a game writer and game designer for various tabletop RPGs, including Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Dungeons and Dragons. So please join us in welcoming Mr. George Strayton.
Hey, Peter and Maroki, nice to see you. I want to find out where Eric is and go there. That sounds
after
fun.
the stream. I'll send you the Airbnb location if you want to go and eat pizza all weekend and drink probably pretty bad beer and just watch the strangest fringe movies.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. I know Eric's pick is like some sort of like gory horror thing, which apparently challenges his friends because his friends are actually not horror people at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because given that it's a genre that so many people love, most of his friend group is not into that at all. I get the sense that they're artsy but a little bit fluffy, and a lot of them love Taylor Swift.
Yeah, generally not associated with horror.
Yeah, no. I don't know. You know what? I see a movie out there. I mean, half the victims or even main female characters tends to be some young blonde girl, anyways. Usually they survive, and then they become Taylor Swift.
Final girl Taylor Swift would be a really interesting creative choice.
Yeah.
And speaking of creative choices, we actually put it to you folks, our fine Story Engine community, to let us know what kind of genre of television show you want us to create today. Because what we're going to do with our guest is Well, first, we're going to ask you a little bit about your top tips and tricks for like working in a writer's room, your experiences in running writers' rooms, and coming up with scripts for television and for movies. We want to get all of that wonderful wisdom, and then we're going to actually run a simulated TV writer's room where we're going to use some prompts to come up with I believe we talked about doing a pilot for a show, so like what a first episode might look like. The chat will actually get to participate and pitch their ideas for like scripts or characters or how we could construct an episode. And in advance of this episode, we reached out to our community and asked them what kind of genre would you want it to be in. So we asked, do you want it to be fantasy, science fiction, horror, like Eric's pick for Movie Fest, or mystery? And we ended up voting for fantasy. So we are going to be scripting a fantasy television show today. And you actually still have a chance to vote on what kind of tone you would like the show to have. So I believe that the choices as of right now are it can be a comedic tone, it can be a dramatic tone, it can be a procedural, or it can be an animated show. So you can actually go to @StoryEngineDeck on social media. I believe the places that we are taking votes right now are Blue Sky, Twitter, and Facebook, I think are the places where you can go ahead and vote in the comments.
I think.
Oh, and Threads. So you have about the next 20 minutes or so to get a vote in if you'd like to see us tackle a particular style. And otherwise,
Thanks,
everything else
Peter,
about the
for
show,
getting more work to us. So we have to count votes live on the stream.
We'll be doing a little bit of live vote counting, but it's because we want a chance to create something that you're interested in. So it'll be a lot of fun to explore that.
Yes, it will be fun to explore that. And the thing is, before we launch into these questions that we have for you, George, Peter failed to also omit like the favorite fandom of mine that you've also written on, which is Transformers. So I just thought I would throw that out there just so that I can have my little moment, because there's a lot of there's a lot of big names, and I love my Star Wars, and Xena is like Xena and Hercules was probably every single one of us millennials' childhood.
That's funny.
I don't know how many millennials are out there in the audience and you guys watch Xena, Warrior Princess, and Hercules, but I'm sure all of us have something near and dear to our hearts, and I'm sure for the people who love Xena, especially, kind of like tickled all our little queer hearts out there growing up. But yes, I thought I would mention the Transformers element because that makes me giggle a little bit as well.
That's funny. I did, yeah, and I actually did one thing that was really fun was I got to write a comic book for IDW, a Transformers comic book.
Yes.
On the character Mirage. So that was a really So then I didn't have no oversight, no toy companies telling you what to do, no studio executives telling you what to do. So that was really super fun.
Was it like the whole thing about how he's like a double agent, and was it the dream sequence one?
Yeah, that's right.
I read it.
Wow. Oh my God, that's amazing. Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
When I say I'm a fan, it's funny. I actually didn't like grow up as a Transformers fan at all. I actually didn't even know what they were. I thought they were like Gundams. Like I thought people piloted them. Because I was in the anime first, and then I was dragged to the third movie, like the third Bay movie, by friends who were fans, and like without even watching the first two, and I literally saw it and was like, "Oh my God, they're sentient! This changes everything!" And then I like dove down the rabbit hole. Like I bought those compendiums, those IDW compendiums, and I read them front to back. So, anyways, awesome. I love that you did the Mirage story.
That's great. I wish I had you in the room with me. I pitched the studio an idea for the second one where we went to Cybertron and we got to spend time there. And they were like, no one wants to see that. They just want to see stuff on Earth. I know.
The literal entire IDW series that only recently ended was like Robots in the Skies More Than Meets the Eye. And they were literally on Cybertron. Okay, we're like completely derailing. You and I
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, sorry guys. There's very few people in this world who like is as deep as I am into the lore and actually can talk at it and understand what I'm saying versus just like sitting there bored as I just blather at them for the next like 20 minutes about Transformers lore.
I'm loving this. I'm not as deep in the Transformers lore. I've not had as much exposure to Transformers, but I'm absolutely loving the energy. And actually, that has made me think of a question that we did not add to our interview questions that I'm going to just add right now.
But this is actually a really good conversation about the writer's room and what you do, because you were just talking about pitching. Because there was this meme out there that came out years ago about like people, how they broke down different jobs. It's like what people think I do versus what I actually do. Yeah. And I know, so like I do a wine blog at night, and I think a lot of people just think I just sit there in a chair lounging, just being like, oh yes, wine. I just drink wine all day. Like, what a life I live. And that's obviously not the case. It's like there's a lot of research, a lot of understanding, a lot of spitting, a lot of sore teeth from all the acid, just stuff like that. So what do you think are some of the common myths around the work you do as a writer and a producer, and like maybe the parts of the job that surprise them because they don't expect that to be part of the job description when you say, well, I'm a professional TV writer?
Right. Well, what I actually do is I usually sit around drinking wine all the time. And no, that's a great question, because I didn't know what you would do until I actually did it. If you're in a writer's room, and of course, it's very different whether you're doing TV or film, in the U.S. at least, because it's different around the world. But in the U.S., if you are doing, if you're writing, the one that I think is probably closer to the truth is for features. So you basically go get the job from my dog is having a nightmare and making noises. Sorry about that. You get the assignment in some way, like you've pitched your version of the idea, or you have an original idea, you've pitched them, and then they send you off and you sit at home and you write for the most part. So that's probably what people mostly traditionally think that a screenwriter would do. And then the screenwriter turns in the draft, and then 10 other people take over and rewrite it. And that writer has nothing to do with that project anymore. That is slightly changing to be closer to the TV model. And that's what's very different, I think, than what most people expect. It's a much more comprehensive job. Some people I've talked to think that it's, you're just writing the dialogue, whatever it is that you're doing as a screenwriter. You're just writing down the dialogue and that's it. But of course you're not. You're coming up with the entire structure. You're coming up with the characters. You're coming up with the themes, etc. You also wind up writing the dialogue, but that's sort of the last thing you do. In a TV writer's room, you're not only once you get to a certain level, you're not only a writer, but you're also a producer automatically. And it's not just a title for the sake of having a title. You actually are doing a job, which is essentially you're doing two jobs. One is you're writing the show, and you're doing that collaboratively with your writer's room, which could be, on Xena, we had very few writers. We had 4, I think, total at the most. Sometimes you'll have 12, like especially on a 30-minute sitcom. But so you work collaboratively to break the story, which is coming up with the structure. And then ultimately somebody will be assigned to write the episode and write a draft, come in, get notes from the rest of the team, etc. But what winds up happening on the producer side of the job is that you will then oversee the production. So you're doing the casting. You're in charge of, all the decisions about costumes, locations, props, etc., budget, all of those things. And often what that means is that you will go to set. So again, this is not for animation, but it's for live action. You would go to set wherever you're shooting, even if it's not in the same place where the writer's room is. And you are there, you've hired the director, and you're overseeing the show to make sure it aligns with the vision of the series, which has been promised to the studio and the network. So you got to make sure you're delivering what they've paid for. So you work with everybody. You'll have a dozen or so department heads. That could be cinematography or sound or, any of the different, the prop master, et cetera, to make sure everybody is on the same page and to answer lots and lots and lots and lots of questions, which is basically the job all day long once you're on set. So ultimately, and then post-production as well. So then you're overseeing the cuts and coming up with the producer's cut, which gets sent to the studio, and then it kind of goes from there. So you do get to, and the advantage of that is that because you get to go through the entire process of concept all the way through to actually finished episode, it informs the way you write. So you might be on set and realize, the way that this was written, it makes it really difficult to film, or it takes a lot of time, or et cetera. And so now when you come in to do the next episode, you have that knowledge and you can make better decisions that make everything more efficient, and therefore ideally make the show better, because everybody has more time to devote to the right things instead of the wrong things. So It is very comprehensive, and it's really fun in that way. If you like to write individually, I would say stay in the feature realm, or do a UK show where there's 6 episodes and 1 writer, if you like being collaborative, TV is really great, and you make a lot of friends and you have a good time. and you get a lot of free food. So it's always like a kitchen full of free food. In fact, a friend of mine said, it's really easy to kill a TV writer, because what happens is a writer is like, comes back from the kitchen and is like, chomping on a donut, and this is good. Like, wait, where did these come from? Like, just because food just appears out of nowhere. So if you poisoned it, no writer would even stop to think twice about where did this food come from.
It kind of like reminds me of when I was working on a lot of indie films. So I was a producer for a number of years. I was a producer and actor in like theater, live events, and eventually film. But it was always one of those. It was always one of those, like, if you needed actors to come and work, you always had to make sure that the craft table was really full. It was like, that's like the bare minimum that you fed them. And I still remember once we had a teenager on set, and their parents came. And their parents saw the craft table, and I kid you not, they like emptied it. They came with like a bag, and they just like swept the whole thing into their bag. And I was kind of like, how do I like tell them that they can't do this? But I also I can't, because this is a low budget film. So they are technically entitled to eat as much as they want. So I remember there was like this period where I like had to leave the craft table empty, because every time I refilled it, they actually just took it right off the table. And it was like, it was getting to the point where it was a little bit inappropriate. But it's actually fascinating how you describe, because like I said, having been a producer and worked on the producer side, I've handled things like budget, work with the directors, bring the team, understand the flow, but I'm also not writing. And because that's such a different skill set to have. And I don't consider myself a writer for screen and television. So I'm sure there's writers, when they join the writer's room, don't really consider themselves a producer, right? There's so many writers out there who are like, budget what? Like, like logistics, this what? Like, that's a huge demand on them. And so I'm assuming there's probably writers in the writer's room who aren't working on the producing side as well, and that maybe there's like senior writers like yourself who's picked up that production savvy, or has actively like sought that. Like, when you first entered the writer's room, was that something you knew that you were going to get put into as well, like having to put on that producer hat?
That is a great question. My undergraduate degree is actually in economics. Yes, so that was helpful, even though I just did it because I at some point had to make a decision of what my major was, and those were the most credits I had already. I was like, whatever. But it came in handy. My MFA is in writing and directing, so I kind of got both sides of the coin there. But when I got into the room, I had no idea that that's what was going to be the case. And we had our showrunners were Bob Orsi and Alex Kurtzman. And we were all in our 20s, and there were so few people on the staff that they would say, okay, we need somebody to go tomorrow morning to do playback. And it's across town, and it's like 6 a.m. And I was like, I'll do it. And they're like, okay, great. Fantastic. I just have one question. Yeah. Like, what's playback? They're like, just go and you'll find out. So it was a lot of on the job learning. And so what all of us who worked on that show, who all have stayed friends, have done since then, because a lot of times when you start out, yes, you're just a writer. So you'll be a staff writer as the first level, entry level position, and then you'll work way up. And at a certain point you hit a producer level. But what we've always done, because of the way we learned, is that we always have the staff writers go to set for their episode, so that they can start, with one of us, a higher level writer, to help them learn the producing side. Because there's no other way to learn it. It's like suddenly you hit this point where suddenly you're, people are relying on you to be responsible for the production side in terms of budget. Like, I'll get a question like, hey, we're $70,000 over on the VFX budget for this episode. Fix it. And so if you don't know anything, how are we going to deal with that problem? So we always try to make sure that we get, whatever even the lowest level writer is on the show, to actually get a chance to learn on the job too. And that really is the best way to do it. So you at least slowly over time, you gain enough knowledge that then you feel like, you're confident enough to go and do that part of it. So that's sort of how it happened for me. It doesn't happen on every show, unfortunately. But ideally, if you're in that position, you get a chance to kind of visit and start learning on the job.
And speaking of knowledge over time, we have a question here from the chat from E.R. Hoffer, kind of about your experiences. Was there ever a time in your career where you found inspiration that surprised you? Didn't seem like the idea should work, but it ended up working brilliantly, or having something to it?
That is another amazing question. So yes, right away. So when I was working on Hercules, same showrunners, Kevin Sorbo, as you know, was the star of that show, and he had done we couldn't talk about this for the longest time until he went on Oprah and talked about it. So now all bets are off. So what happened is he was doing Hercules, and at the same time he did a movie, a Cole movie, the Robert E. Howard character, and he kind of overdid it, and so he wound up having an aneurysm, and he was kind of out of commission for a while, so he missed 8 episodes of Hercules. But we couldn't not produce those 8 episodes. And this is, at the time where we were doing 24 episodes a season, or maybe down to 22, but a lot. So to miss the main character for 8 episodes, we're like, what are we going to do? Like, we can't recast them. What's going to happen? So the 2 showrunners, Bob and Alex, came up with this genius idea, which was to do an episode called Yes, Virginia, There Is a Hercules. And the premise was that there really was a Hercules in real life, modern day, who was pretending his undercover persona was an actor in Hollywood named Kevin Sorbo. And he was missing. And the episode is about like the hunt for Kevin Sorbo, who, AKA Hercules, who we get glimpses of on TV, maybe is saving people from some kind of environmental devastation going on in the world. And so we then had all of the actors from the show playing the writers and the producers of the show. So Lucille, that happened, and then we did it again on Xena, but on Hercules, like we had Michael Hurst, who played Aeolus, the kind of sidekick character, playing a producer, etc. So we kind of, and with the real names of the people and assistants. My friend Melissa Blake, she was played by one of the actors as well, and she's gone on to be like an amazing writer. So I was like, it became one of our most popular episodes. So out of this like panic of like, how are we going to do the show with no main character, came something that was so popular that we did it again on Xena. So that's a great question, and it opened my mind to the possibilities of what you can do with I think it's a perfect thing to bring up in the context of Story Engine. When something random happens and you think it's not going to work, but you figure out a way to make it work, those are always the best ideas.
Yeah. It's also interesting because it's like breaking the fourth wall trope in a lot of films or television shows is such like a thing now, right? It's like a very trendy thing to have like these people just kind of create an alternate universe moment in a few episodes or something. And I think that's cool that it kind of like you guys did it long before. I didn't even, like out of a necessity more than anything else. And, to your point about the story engine, it's also one of those things we talk a lot about in our live streams or otherwise, that sometimes you might pull a card that you don't think fits with the setting or the plot you're creating. But we've often, and, obviously story engine doesn't have rules. You don't have to use that card if you don't like it, but we've often challenged our writers and creatives to say, just try it though. Just try it once. Try it on for size, because you'd be surprised, right? Like at what it's going to unlock in your creative brain when it comes down to it. Thank you for that question. And yeah, chat, if you guys have questions, like drop them in the comments. We're going to ask it throughout our live stream. We'll ask it or, at the end. So just keep them coming. We are making sure that we're going to capture as much as we can. And we're going to make sure that George can answer them as much as he can as well, because I'm sure a lot of us have burning questions to ask. Going back to, what you were saying about how you kind of fell into your producer role, like I resonate with that a lot, because that's sort of what happened to me. Like I was an actor with a lot of business savvy. I did an arts and business degree. That was like the compromise I had with my family to go and become an actor versus an engineer. And it was one of those that as I was working as an actor on set or trying to get work, I found that I was landing more producer work because the ability to do logistics and numbers were coming so easy to me. And I just sometimes couldn't help but open my mouth when I was on set too, to be like, I see this problem you have here and I must solve it now. And then that's how I stumbled into the role. But going back to the writing side of things, like I find, at least I tried it once in my life during like one of these monthly writer challenges. And when I did theater workshops, that writing script for movies and television is very different than novel writing, and writing a book. At least so I find it per se. I know when I switch the script, like I don't even know how to write dialogue between people anymore without having to write some filler, some description between that's like, oh, he looked into her eyes and did this and this, right? Like And so if you're giving advice to a writer who wanted to kind of switch from writing for novels or for books into TV scripts or screenplay, what sort of advice would you give to them?
That's also a really awesome question. I started out thinking I was going to be a novelist. Unfortunately, I'm a terrible novelist. In fact, I had a job offer to work at Valentine Del Rey in New York as an editorial assistant. So not even an assistant editor, just like getting coffee. And instead, I moved out to Hollywood. Because I realized that I had no feature. Because my goal was like, oh, if I get him, Valentine Del Rey does, sci-fi fantasy, like this is great. I'll learn a lot on the inside, what the editors are looking for, make connections, and then ultimately become a novelist. But I was such a bad novelist. I was like, I know this is not going to work for me. And so when I moved here, what I had discovered was I had been reading scripts, because when I worked at West End Games, which is one of the companies I worked for in gaming before I did this job, we often did things based on movies and TV shows like Star Wars or Indiana Jones. But I remember we got the script for Men in Black. So we had to write a Men in Black role-playing game that had to be delivered when the movie came out. So of course there's no movie to watch yet. So I'm just reading the script. And as I read the script, I was like, oh, this is the format that I like. Like this speaks to me. So I recognized it was very different from novel writing and came more naturally to me. And so what the differences are to me, one of the primary ones is novel writing. There's a great emphasis on the words that you use, the phrasing, the poetry of the overall cadence of the piece, et cetera, whatever you're going for, whether you're going for a Hemingway style or a more purple style or whatever it is, there's an emphasis on that. Whereas in screenwriting, there's not. It really is just about, it's not meant to be a final product, of course. It's meant to be a guide for everybody to create whatever it is you're going for that's going to be filmed. And so you just want to get, in the fewest number of words, the idea down on the page of what you're envisioning. And you only have two things to work with. Like in a novel, you could write about what a character is smelling or feeling or et cetera. We don't have that in film or TV. You've got sight and sound. That is it. So that's all you can put on the page. And what I started out doing was really being detailed about, let's say, a room, a location. So I'm talking about a room. I'm very detailed about what kind of paint is on the wall and what kind of flooring there is and what's in the room and et cetera. And I go on for lines and lines and lines and lines. Very quickly realize that is not helpful. Really, you want to have one or two lines maybe of description. And you're just trying to convey the vibe. It's all about the vibe. So it's more about trying to just capture the essence of that location in a way that then everybody who needs to make that location work, whether that's actually finding the location or building the location all the way through filming that location, understands what you're going for. So you can have one location like a kitchen and shoot it in a way that's really bright and vivid and like fun, etc. Or you could have that really dark and dreary, like tragic feeling kitchen. So the idea is to get across like what each person who is an expert in their field, set decoration or costumes or whatever, the enough to go on without telling them exactly what to do. So just in the way that you write things down, it's very different. And then the other major difference is that there's a very clear structure that if you're doing television, you, for the most part, need to follow because that's what the audience expectation is. Not everybody does that, and often there's really cool shows who break the mold, but it's still good to know what the mold is.
Like for example, when you do a meta-narrative version of your own show based around investigating the actors playing the people who created it, for example.
Yeah, that's exactly. So you can tell, but you only can do it if you know how it works. Right. And so that structure, that kind of sort of classic 3-act structure, which is really honestly just how the human brain works. I always think of it like a Hegelian dialectic, where it's like thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And that's what I try to present in my first act, second act, third act. So it's definitely more structure oriented than a novel, where you can essentially do anything. I do think there's more opportunities these days to do anything in TV or film. Well, TV, and not as much film, like in the Hollywood world. If you're doing more A24 kind of independent style, yeah, you can basically do anything that people are willing to put up money for. So, disconnecting my mind from the words I was typing, from what I was getting across to the people who were actually going to make the show took me a while to like grasp. And somebody said to me once, like, you should be a novelist. I was like, no, I should not be a novelist. I get it though. I gotta pare it down. Just do the bare minimum. So yeah, I think those are the main differences.
I think it's one of those things though. Like every time I think that there's like a template, I also learned that there's always some expert out there who's already broken that template. Like I studied Sean O'Casey, who was an Irish playwright, when I did Northern Ireland playwriting when I did a year there abroad for school. And the thing I specifically studied was these, as a playwright, I find theater script a little bit similar. It's probably a little more descriptive, but similarly is a little more vibey because you're allowing the set interpretation to whoever's creating that play. But Sean O'Casey would write like these short novels above most of his sets. And I actually wrote this like whole paper about how Sean O'Casey's extremely over descriptive scene settings was like an exploration of Irish poverty and like his description of social struggle at the time. So, and that's like, and I think there's just like, I guess rules are meant to be broken, and it's good to have a template so that we don't completely fall away from building something that a lot of people are trained to understand. But then there's ways to subvert that. Maybe as a follow-up question too, is this one came from Dallas here, and I figured it's as good as the time to follow up on it, asking about game writing. Because do you find that it's like, does it have like similarities to, let's say, film and television because of that structure? Or is there some differences? Like for me, the thing I'm thinking about is like in a game, there has to be like some sort of dedicated end that you must get the player to go towards, or there might be alternative endings depending on the type of game you play.
Yeah. This is another awesome question. And just to follow up on your playwriting point, I actually am a dramaturg for a theater company that's run by Renee O'Connor, who played Gabrielle on Xena. And we just did Midsummer Night's Dream and 1984. And those were very different the way they were written when you look at the plays. And so, the amount of information on each one, there's none basically in Shakespeare. And there's a lot in more modern plays. So yeah, it definitely varies depending on what you're doing. I think you do have more leeway in theater. But in terms of game writing, there's a major difference and then a lot of similarities. So to start with the similarities, which ties into what we're talking about and which I often will use Story Engine for, is the world building side of things. I love world building. It's one of the most fun parts of creating anything to me, whether it's a game or a TV show or a movie. And you especially in genre, if you're doing genre, but even a show which is semi-genre like Severance, there's a lot of world building that goes into that, even though it's not fantasy. It kind of has a sort of sci-fi element to it, but it's modern day. But you have to build the world so that it's believable, so that the characters that you create that can exist in the world, and the characters then are believable. And really the world building is a character. And it should be a reflection of the show you're making in terms of theme and tone, etc. The major difference, as you would expect, is characters. So in game design, you don't know what characters are going to go on a particular mission, adventure, or whatever. So you do have to build in lots of options, and you have to think about the types of players, not characters, but types of players you have. Some people are more interested in the game part of the game. Some people are more interested in the narrative part of the game, or the mystery part, or just role playing their character, etc., or love puzzles or whatever. So you have to kind of build that into your way of thinking. And then secondly, you don't know what the specific characters are going to be. So you can't create, for example, obstacles that are entirely, let's say, the kind of three pillars of, gaming, like social, etc. You can't create a bunch of encounters that are just social encounters. Because what if you have a bunch of fighters? You're kind of limiting what the options are for those characters. So, and then of course you're not controlling the narrative. So the great thing I think about tabletop role-playing games, as opposed to computer games, is that you've got a game master there who can adjudicate anything. So you can actually do whatever you want and make whatever kind of story that you want to make out of a game. And the story may just be about the characters accomplishing their goal, or the story may be about interpersonal relationships between the characters. And I've played in every different game system, that there is, and you can do that in any game system. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game, or a D20 game, or a 2D20 game, or whatever it might be. So yeah, that to me is the major difference. Is when you're writing TV or film, you are in charge of who the characters are, and you can create the exact right obstacles that you need to have them go on a journey. And you also know how they're starting out in terms of their character arc, where they're starting out and where they're going to end up. And that also informs what kind of journey you're going to put them on.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion recently about how the architecture of the game system you use kind of starts to set the expectations for the type of gameplay that happens. Like in the same way that like D&D, so many of the rules are oriented around combat. You could absolutely do roleplay with it, but that's where it shines. So, there are games where if you put a battle map in front of people, they may not necessarily think we're going to fight. They might think we're going to explore. D&D, if you put a battle map, you're usually setting the expectation that there's going to be some kind of fight. So yeah, it's very interesting to see how the kind of a lot of the same principles are true for like building branching stories where there's room for choice and where you can represent the goals and impulses of different players. But also there's those things that become particular to the system that are really fun to explore. And actually, this that wonderful question from Dallas there made me realize I'd actually love to hear from our chat on like what is the format or the genre that you're writing in right now, and what's your favorite thing about it? This question is dual purpose. One, it's something that I'm curious to know how people are going to be plugged into the script writing process and what kind of gifts they're bringing to the table when we run the writer's room shortly, and also because we plan to do future workshops for the Story Engine series. The last full workshop of the season is happening next week, but we'll have a chance to do future ones. So, if we're able to bring George back to talk about game writing, we want to know: do we have game writers here? People who want to learn about game writing?
Yeah, because we talk about how our decks, how a lot of like dungeon masters and game masters love using our decks to create world settings and lore for their campaigns, but we've never really talked about the art of creating games themselves. A lot of our writers tend to come to us telling us that they are novelists. I think a lot of it's like traditional like paperback prose novel stuff, but that's not to say that there haven't been TV writers or script writers or theater writers out there. So I'd be super, super curious to know what genres of people are writing in. And if you guys are writers and you guys use the Story Engine decks, if you guys have used any of our expansions, or if you found like any of our expansions or boosters helpful towards the different genres and styles that you write in, I'd be super curious to hear about that. And for those of you who are joining us a little, about 30-ish minutes in, and whether you're for the first time or joining us again, we are the Story Engine. We create a wonderful deck of writing prompts that helps writers, creatives, dungeon dragons, dungeon masters, and educators find ways to generate creativity, generate story prompts, world building prompts, and lore. And we're running our workshop series. This is, I think, workshop, I want to say like 4 or 5 of our series this for this winter, although it's almost spring. So yes to that. Where we bring on a expert once a week to share their skill sets and expertise and kind of let us lean into their world of creativity a little bit. And joining us this week is George Strayton, who is a prolific TV writer and producer who's worked on notable names like Xena, the Warrior Princess, Hercules, Severance, and other games other games franchises like Star Wars, and of course my favorite franchise, Transformers.
Yeah, and we'll be transitioning shortly to actually running a simulated writer's room with George. So get your pens out. We're gonna be excited to hear your ideas in the chat. And also, again, if you're joining us from the replay here for the replay crew, please do let us know in the comments what genres you write in, what formats you write for, because that is something that we want to know for planning out future live streams. So it's a question for the chat. It's a question for the replay crew. And if you're leaving us a comment, feel free to boop the like button as well. That always tells the algorithm, like, hey, these are real people having interesting, rich conversations, and we want to see more of it.
We are real people.
Yeah. And I guess one last question, I guess, to help us transition towards the writer's room format. I know there's a lot that changes in the process of moving from like not just writing a novel to writing for TV or a movie, but from writing alone to writing as part of a group. I know that when we were having some conversations before this call, you talked to us about the idea of casting the rooms, that the writer's room gets cast for different writing strengths. So could you just tell us a little bit about, I guess, some of the differences that a lot of people run into when they're transitioning from being a solo writer to writing collaboratively, and what advice would you give?
Yeah. So the way it ultimately works is that a show is bought by a network or a studio, and by network that could be traditional network like Disney or NBC or something, or it could be a streamer. It could be Netflix or Amazon or whatever. So they're all kind of now they call them buyers, but they're basically this is your network. This is your delivery platform, and then you've got a studio as well. And so a showrunner is brought on, either it's because that person created the show in the first place and it was original idea, or they were brought on to adapt, say, a comic book like Walking Dead or something. And that person then is responsible for hiring everybody else, literally everybody else, including the people who are going to write the show, write and produce the show, actually. So you often a showrunner will first hire what's called the number two, which is the person that is at essentially the same level as a showrunner, but not the creative visionary for the show, who then is there to sort of help, sort of like assisting the showrunner in making sure that everything is aligning to what they're going for, because they can't be in two places at once. So often between the two of them, they will then start casting the room, which is reading lots of scripts, or reaching out to people that they know bring a certain kind of specific talent or experience that you need for that particular show. And that could be a person who's like really great with structure, or that could be a person that's really great with the kind of dialogue that you envision for the show. Or it could be somebody who's great with female characters, or somebody who's great with comedy. And so you're kind of picking, but all of whom sensibility wise have an overlap with the show you're trying to make. So you've read lots of scripts and you've reached out to a lot of people, and ultimately you put together this team that's going to work together to break the episodes and write the actual scripts. Once you're in the room and you're working together, and this is what's going to be like today, the rule of thumb is that it's 90% democracy and 10% dictatorship. Because if you don't do it that way, you're going to get a mess. So you want as many great ideas as you can possibly get. That's why you've brought all these people together. So you want people to be able to like suggest anything, even the most off the wall thing, seemingly that might be the exact perfect thing you want, or leads to something that you need. But at the end of the day, it's really the vision of the person who promised the buyer and the studio a show that's very specific. And if it's not delivered that way, everybody's going to be upset because they just spent a crazy amount of money to make whatever it is that they just received. Because the studio and the network, despite the fact that they give notes, they don't know how to make a show. Like studio or network is never going to come and take over a show that's not firing on all cylinders. Because that's not their jobs. That is not what they do. So you just, at the end of the day, as a showrunner, you're responsible for delivering the finished season in this format, or these multiple formats in terms of the size screen, or the different audio versions, Dolby 7.2 or whatever, all the way down to mono, in all the different languages with dubs or whatever. You're responsible. You got to turn all of that in at the end of the season. And then they decide if they thought you did a good job or not. So the only thing you have to go on is your vision. If you don't stick to the vision, it's just going to be all over the place and not going to be the show that you promised. So you get to have all these great resources in terms of people helping you make the show, coming up with things you wouldn't have ever come up with on your own. But at the end of the day, you have to kind of make sure it all still fits into the tone and the story and the characters that you came up with in the first place.
That sounds like an incredible juggling act. So how do you feel about doing it live right now?
It's a juggling act, but it's, I would suggest, because I'm not a juggler, that the jugglers have fun juggling.
Peter is a juggler.
I am a juggler, and I can't.
Peter
confirm.
actually juggles.
Okay. See, all right. So I know one thing. So yeah, it'll be fun. I think we'll have a good time.
Wonderful. Well, then I think it is time for us to reveal the results of the vote for the tone of the show, because that'll be the last little piece that we put in place beforehand. So, Maroki, I have the Instagram page, the Blue Sky, and the Facebook and the Twitter open, but I do not have Threads.
I am trying to pull the Threads open. I have never used Threads on a computer before. I only use it on my phone, so I'm like trying to see if I understand how this works. Okay. Well, I have the votes for the Threads.
All right. So on Twitter, we're at 2 votes for comedic. On Blue Sky, it's a 3rd vote for comedic. On Facebook, we've got a vote for epic dramatic. What do you got over there on Threads?
I have 67% votes for dramatic and 33% procedural. So 2/3 dramatic, 1/3 procedural. So how does all of this math work out?
This adds up to, I think we have a tie right now between comedic and epic dramatic.
Oh my God. So we're going to have to leave it to chat to make the final vote?
Yeah, let's do that.
Oh my God. Okay. So George, this is something we do in chat. You're not allowed to vote yet. You're going to have to wait. Oh, I already see some votes. It's okay. We usually do a thing where we allow the chat to vote, but usually when we're doing prompts, where we give them a 3, 2, 1, go, and people pound that enter button as violently as they can. So this is the one time we let democracy reign. This is not the 10% dictatorship that is coming in yet. We're bringing in the 90% democracy. So the vote is between dramatic and comedic, and you can vote in 3, 2, 1, go.
The first to 3 votes, and yeah, Catherine and Debbie will ask you to vote again.
Yeah, you're gonna have to vote. Punch that enter button again. Punch again. I didn't think we were gonna get a tie, because I think earlier today it was definitely sitting at drama. We have this pitch for dramedy, which I considered pitching that, and then I was like, okay, let's keep it simple, or else this writer's room is going to get insane.
To be honest, we do want to do dramedy, and I say that only because the votes came in for comedic early accidentally, and then dramatic won based on the timing that we did it, but then comedic would have won otherwise. So I think, and it's such an even split, I think let's try and do both. Can we try it? Do we think it's possible?
I think it's possible.
All right.
Fantasy dramedy.
A fantasy.
That is literally Dungeon Meshi coming into play right now. I don't know if you're an anime watcher, George, but Dungeon Meshi is like,
I'm not familiar.
Dungeon Meshi is like the new kind of hot anime that's hitting out there, and it starts. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, but cooking. So it's literally like anime characters go through a dungeon. They're like, this monster. They like kill it. And they're like, looks like we can cook it, and they'll like cook these like completely weird monsters or flora. And fungi, and just be like, wow, this walking sentient mushroom, we just killed it. Can we cook it? And they'll be like, it makes this delicious stew.
That's awesome.
And it started off pretty comedic and light, but it has like recently taken like a hard left, and is definitely starting to hint that it's like, one of my friends who's gone further says apparently just goes off the rails. But it's from where I am in watching the series, it's taking that turn where I'm like, seems like there's like conspiracy theory, like social, like political intrigue stuff. Some really weird ass, like dark blood magic stuff is starting. And I'm like, where is this going? I thought I was just getting like my fantasy version of Chopped, and now it's like going down this rabbit hole. So anyways, that's where the dramatic part of Dungeon Meshi is coming in from the comedy. So, all right, dramedy it is, folks. Democracy has spoken.
Yes. And often that's what will happen. Like, if you're a working TV writer, meaning you're not the showrunner, you get hired onto a show, you want to be able to do almost anything. So let's say you happen to be a genre person, but you're not a dramedy person. Well, when you get into that room, because you're a fantasy person, so you've been cast in the room because you're great at fantasy, and you know all the different fantasy things that have been done, you know all the tropes, so that you can say, well, that's been done here and that's been done here, or here are the options for how to do that. but it's dramedy and you're not familiar with that, you have to get familiar and you have to then be able to do it, because if you're pitching ideas that are not fitting into what you've been assigned to do, you're going to quickly find yourself not in that room anymore. So this is a great exercise for everybody.
Yeah. And writers, maybe you guys go through a similar thing, but I remember that, I don't know if you ever like think you're one thing, you actually turn out to be the other. So when I was in my 20s, I was always like, I'm a dramatic actor. I'm a serious actor. I can talk about like how I've struggled. And then every time I went on stage, people were like, you were so funny, Muroki. You need to be a comedian. I'm like, I'm not funny. I'm a drama actor. But I learned that I apparently have really inbuilt comedic timing. And that was something I eventually had to kind of like embrace as I got older and being like, it's okay, Muroki. Like, it's okay to be funny. You don't have to live a life full of angst. Yeah. You don't always have to be a brooding main character in something.
There's people who would kill to be funny, you know. So it's always good to have something that you effortlessly do that gets recognized and pointed out to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Peter, do you want to set the parameters for the writer's room?
Actually, I think I will let George do that.
Yes. Sorry, I was trying to like. I know you guys had like a thing worked out.
Yeah, well, actually, the thing we worked out is that we were gonna do it full jazz. We're gonna feel it out and play it out. So, George, I have here all of the main decks on tap for Story Engine, Deck of Worlds, Lore Masters deck. Actually, and we'll briefly review what those are, just because I think some people in the chat may be new to the deck systems. We'll do a quick review of that, and then behind me I have all of the expansions. So, if we want to get granular with anything, we have the genre cards. We have to be able to do like nicknames and namesakes. We can build deities, whatever we like. So you can tell me kind of how you want to build it out from here, what cards you want to see. But first, I'll just quickly let the chat know if this is your first time encountering one of our decks. We are the Story Engine team, Muroki and I, and Eric, who's absent today. We release these decks of creative prompts to help writers and dungeon masters and other creatives come up with either story ideas, which is what the Story Engine deck is really good with, helping them come up with ideas for world building and building settings, which is what Deck of Worlds is specialized at. And then we have a new deck that just came out called Lore Masters deck, which is for building complex webs of lore, so you can see how the elements of your world tie together to create a grand tapestry. You can create factions, creatures, objects, locations, materials, figures from history, just a little bit of everything. And those are the three main deck systems we have, and all of them may eventually come into play today, depending on what we need to build out our TV series pilot here. So walk us through, I guess, how you want this to proceed.
Yeah, so I think, obviously we have a certain amount of time, so we want to, make sure I'd like to get to a basic idea, a breakdown of what the pilot's going to be. That'll set, the tone and establish the setting and the characters for the series. So we're not going to create like 15 characters and like 14 story arcs and all that stuff. Because it's fantasy, I think what I'd like to start with, before going into characters, is the world. So especially with fantasy, like it's such a major component of what makes it, defines the genre. It'll also inform every other choice we make. So I thought maybe we'd start with the Deck of Worlds and generate a cool location where we're going to set this show. Because the other thing about doing a TV series is that you always have to think about budget. And so you can't really, it's very difficult to do like a road show where the characters are going to constantly be going from one location to another because you just can't afford to build that many locations or travel to that many locations. So we're going to want to have like our kind of like home turf where most of the show is most likely going to be based. And even on Hercules and Xena, what we would do is we shot in New Zealand and we had some great environments, but we used the same ones over and over again. We just redressed them. And we had built one exterior standing set, kind of look like a castle, but it could be anything, like whatever we needed to change it to. But you're always going to do yourself a favor by like really focusing in on one particular spot that the audience is going to be familiar with and that you can, go to easily for production.
Yeah. So we'll shoot it in Toronto and we'll pretend it's somewhere else.
Yes, I have done that in Toronto, Vancouver, wherever.
Shoot in Toronto. Everyone shoots like 2 hours away from Toronto these days in like Hamilton or Waterloo because they have way more tax breaks because no one can afford to get a permit to shoot in Toronto. It's like New York, right? Like you can't get a permit to shoot anywhere in New York. Half the time you're trying to steal shots like running up and down the street. half the time.
That is
Yeah,
very true.
for those of you who are budding, I don't know, film and TV people in our chat today, let me tell you one secret. The reason why it's called stealing a shot is so, you know, in most places like we were discussing here, like cities, you can't just bring a camera crew in and just shoot a film. You normally have to apply and obtain a permit in order to shoot in certain locations because obviously, you know, it's an inconvenience to places if you have to close a road or do something. But there's some places where you're actually not even allowed to get a permit, or it's really, really hard because of permissions, because of cost and all those things like that. But if you manage to successfully get on a location, shoot the scene you need, and run away before you're arrested or fined or kicked out, you have effectively stolen the shot and you are allowed to use it in your final product. So just sharing that for you guys out there. If you guys are aspiring filmmakers that never need to get that elusive shot. There's definitely stories of the Staten Island Ferry in a film in a scene I shot on once where it was an indie film, SAG ultra low budget, did not have the ability to get a permit, and we all like came on with like the professional camera, but we came on with our cell phones. The camera was hid under a coat. I don't know if I should be telling you the story. It's okay, the film is done now, but like we were like, oh, happy graduation, friend, and we were like snapping like pictures of her being like, oh my god, we're riding the ferry. And then, like, the second we had a moment, we'd be like, okay, now, like, dramatically stare out in the distance and, like, say your lines. And we'd, like, shoot the camera, hide it back. Like, snapping. Anyways, Peter,
let's find out where we're going to steal the shot then.
Yeah, we're going to steal the shot.
Yeah.
Also, Peter, I don't know if at any point we want to shuffle in, like, any of our fantasy world building expansion cards.
Sure, I think we'll start with the base, and then George, let me know if you ever want me to pull a specific genre. Because we have the fantasy right here. I just grabbed the base deck to start.
Yeah, I like
and
that.
Also, you can make calls yourself, or you can throw it to the chat for discussion or for votes whenever you feel like.
I think
choices for region.
To get the collaborative ball rolling, let's have the chat decide which of these three they prefer. Now, I will say, and maybe other people already know who are in the chat, what exactly is a moraine?
A moraine is the space that's left over after thousands of years of glacial action carves away like I think it tends to be a valley shape, but often it's also very rich in like mineral deposits and sediments because of that glacial action.
Cool.
And that's what's left over. Yeah.
See, so you learn something. Not only is it fun to use Story Engine, you learn something.
And sometimes you have
to over Peter.
Sometimes you have to remember what a word means because you looked it up 2 years ago when you were writing the deck, and hope that some of it's still there. So, also, there were some, the process of writing the deck carved away a huge part of my mental landscape, and it left a little deposit of sediment, which I think is a potentially partially correct definition of the word moraine.
That sounds good to me. Let's go with it either way.
Okay.
Okay.
So what do you think, everybody? Which one should
so go ahead and vote for port, lake, or moraine for our primary setting here, and you can go ahead and vote in 3, 2, 1, go.
I like how chat was like very good this time. They were like, we know it's coming. We know it's coming. We've set the rules for democracy this time. Moraine's actually one of our most like asked questions. Like I pull moraine actually strangely a lot when I'm demoing the deck. It's almost like hard the cards. Like it just the card moraine always is at the top of my hand, and it's one that people ask a lot about. I think, did Moraine get it? I feel
Moraine
like
got it.
It was pitched and it was won.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Interesting. I can't think of a show that's set in a moraine. So we're already coming up with something unique. All right. So I think next, let's get a landmark in here. And this may start telling us something about what the show revolves around.
All righty. Pulling a landmark. We can have a trail or a settlement.
So I'm just going to pick to make it easy because a trail is not going to work because we can't have a lot of movement because we're doing a show and we don't have the budget. So we'll pick a settlement, which to me suggests something kind of remote, something that's more frontier like, which is cool. All right, great. One of my favorite types of cards, I will say, is the namesake card.
Me too.
So let's go for that next.
Namesake card, yeah. And so for those who don't know, region gives you the primary sort of terrain type that you're working with for your location using Deck of Worlds. Landmark is a point of interest, and then the namesake is a card that can be paired with either the region, or the landmark to give it an in-world nickname. We could have the Rising Moraine or the Moraine of Despair. We could have the Settlement of Lightning, the Settlement where no one goes, the Moraine where no one goes. You can mix and match the combinations there. Is there anything here evocative to you, George?
Let's see. I'm gonna let the chat decide this one because it'll definitely start really establishing the tone, I think. So minerals miners, that's good. So I'll let the chat pick out from those four which they want, and I'll decide which one it goes on.
Cool. Roki, you want to conduct the vote here?
Sure. So we will give you the words. There is lightning, despair, rising, or no one. And you can vote in 3, 2, 1, go. I also like the pitches that, like, I guess our writer's room, who's chat, you guys are part of the writer's room today. I love the pitches that you guys are already sharing. I think they're going to be really, really useful as we come together with this plot.
Awesome.
Yeah, see, there's even over here like a rising settlement over here.
So hold on, we got.
Let's see.
Rising, despair, no one.
I think
goes,
despair just eked it.
I think despair got it. So this is the drama part of the dramedy,
right? Where's the comedy?
Yeah.
Let's go with settlement. Let's put it on Settlement of Despair.
Settlement of Despair. Sounds like a very cheery place.
Right.
Let's see. Do you have a suggestion, Peter, to conclude you guys in the writer's room process of what kind of card to draw next?
I think I would go through the standard order here still.
Okay.
The only reason I would ever consider skipping the origin here specifically is because the Moraine kind of comes with a bit of an origin built in. For those who don't know, origin cards are a card type in Deck of Worlds that gives you some kind of piece of the past of the location, whether something that originated there or something that caused the place to originate and explains its sort of founding story. Moraines, we know, are the leftover spaces from glacial action, so it kind of gives us a little bit of, I think there even is a like shaped by glacial action prompt in the origins deck in the Arctic expansion, but I think it's still good to know more about the past here, so I think it's still worth drawing redundantly. So we could have it be the home of a vanished people. We could have it be founded by outcasts. It could be the last known location of an ancient artifact, or said to have been the home of gods. Or
I think I'm gonna probably go back and forth between picking myself and letting the writer's room decide. You know what? Let's go with the let's go with the last known location of an ancient artifact.
This card is particularly, all of these are pretty good story hooks. Like they kind of all have something there that you could work with for the purposes of teasing out a plot. So I like that. And artifact could be easily a season-long MacGuffin, if not a show concept.
I could also even see that artifact is like part of the Moraine as opposed to part of the settlement.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, because like then like the whole ties of old glacial action, like things could be lost, it could be pulled away, it could be buried.
Yeah.
And the settlement maybe doesn't even know anything about the artifact. I'm like, in my brain, it's like if there's people coming into this town, it's like as opposed to people living into this town, it's like this is why people are coming to this town because they want something, and then the settlement is just like they're like, life sucks here. Why is it this is where the comedy part's coming in for me. It's like a settlement of despair, and these people are just like sad and they don't want like to do anything with the world, but then people keep coming in, they treat it like a tourist town. And they're like, is there anywhere to eat? And they're like, no, there's like nothing here. They're like, but there should be. This is a great place. There's like an ancient artifact here. It should be of prosperity. And people are like, no, there is not. Everything's closed.
And if I may pitch something here, and again, this is writer's room rules. So 10% dictatorship. Feel free to bring the dictatorship. I want to do a little corner tuck here. Corner tuck is our sneaky little move where we use 2 prompts. Founded by outcasts, because we're doing a dramedy, because it's meant to be both like serious stakes, characters we care about, but also funny, and because we're already in like the leftovers of glacial action in the settlement of despair, I think this being an outcast group, like us having a more ragtag kind of cast, is a really funny option to have. Or it's like an idea I submit for consideration, I guess. It's founded by outcasts. I think there could be something there for how we structure who these characters are like as underdogs. Because I don't think the people who live in the settlement of despair are doing great in life, if I may. And I think that could be a good vehicle for both the comedy and the drama. people who don't have a lot to lose, but who, if they're outcasts or if they're like on the fringes of society, could have opportunities for these more strange stories. So,
Yeah, I like it.
Submitted for consideration.
Yeah, no, that all sounds great to me. Cool. Okay, and then do you tend to do attribute cards next?
Yeah, we'll do attribute next. So we've got here an attribute card is details about the present day location rather than the past. It could also be details about the people who live there. So they could value unity. They might have distinctive footwear. The area could be known for ruins, or they could be known for a regional legume.
I'm going to make a choice here and go with values unity.
Okay, cool.
I think that'll help with the sort of outcast idea.
Right, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm starting to get an idea that it's sort of like maybe some aspect of it is like that show Northern Exposure. Do you remember that show?
Yeah.
Set in Alaska.
Yeah.
Which was a dramedy. Okay, cool. And then Advent is the last.
Advent is the last card type.
It is one of my favorite card types.
Tell us about the Advent. What does the Advent do?
So the Advent is something, if you look at the way this, how the Deck of Worlds works and building this micro setting, origins is a little something in the past, attributes a little something in the present. The Advent card is something that is yet to come. And it can usually, at least in my opinion, dramatically change where the path of the story you've been creating thus far will go, which is why I find it so exciting, because that's where I always feel like the gears of creativity really start turning when I see the Advent card come.
Yeah, in fact, because it is such an important card type for storytelling, and because we are potentially setting up like a season arc of a show, I'm going to draw 2 just so we have some additional choices, because I do think that we want to be able to pick something that we think is going to work. And I think Farah here made a great contribution. We may not be wanted anywhere else, but we're here, we're one. I think found family, if we do the outcasts thing in Isolated Place, found family could be an amazing theme to play with. So I think that's a great observation.
Love it.
Okay, so 2 Advent cards. We've got a huge construction project is on the verge of collapse, and these are little sub-suggestions for ways you can interpret that. So material shortages, pulled funding, or a workplace hazard is the reason for that. On that same card, we also have an important species is on the brink of extinction. It could be a culturally sacred species, it could be hunted by poachers, or it could be losing its habitat. We've got a prompt for people are openly rioting against an injustice due to social inequality, or perhaps a tyrannical ruler, or an unjust law. And lastly, the showdown of the century is about to take place between rivals. That could be a duel, a bet, or a sports match.
I'm going to pick this one as the showrunner and say, let's go with the injustice.
Cool.
I think for a few reasons, but I think the most important of which is that we can all relate to that. We can all relate to what it's like to feel injustice. So hopefully this will resonate with the potential audience. Cool. Okay. This is great, everybody. Thank you for that. So we're going to leave that as it is without going to further defining exactly the specifics of it, because the next thing that's the other half of the equation for a fantasy dramedy is going to be our main character. Yep. So I was thinking we'd use go to the story deck to create our character.
Let's do it. And do you want to do main deck? Do we want to pull a genre expansion?
Let's go with a genre expansion just to make sure because I think we've created to me, the show, we want to appeal to as many people as possible. So not just to people like us who love fantasy already, but people who maybe are fantasy curious. So we've got a cool setting that I think anybody can relate to, like the kind of Northern Exposure kind of feel. So now let's be a little bit more specific in terms of fantasy to make sure we've got fantasy elements in there too.
Awesome.
Oh my gosh. I also like this pitch from Debbie saying that it's going in a Monty Python sort of direction, which I wasn't thinking of before. And now I am, about strange women lying in pods distributing swords.
No basis for a system of government.
That's great.
So Story Engine deck is a deck of 5 card types for coming up with really character-driven stories. Is the thing that it's best at, but you can mix and match card types to also create settings, plot hooks, conflicts, and other things. So we're going to draw an agent card, which is the first card type in Story Engine deck. These are basically just basic formats for a character type. So on this card, we have an invoker, a monk, a bard, and a weaver.
I'm going to let chat pick this because it's such a defining element of the show, and I did some defining of the location. And bear in mind, writer's room, that this could be what the person is at the start or what the person becomes by the end of the pilot.
Ooh.
Oh, good point.
I like that. And chat, you can vote, and I would love to hear maybe some of your pitches about that too, whether you want this person to start this way or aspire to be this at the end. So we're looking at Bard, Weaver, Invoker, and Monk. Do you want to count us down, George?
3, 2, 1, go.
Beautiful. I'll just take a moment here to shout out that all of the artwork from the fantasy expansion for Story Engine deck comes from the tabletop RPG Emberwind by Nomnivore Games. They are friends of ours. The art is phenomenal, and I really highly recommend the Emberwind roleplay system. Some of my favorite combat mechanics I've ever experienced. I've done some writing for the game, and I really like it. So just a little shout out.
Peter and Eric actually both wrote on the game, so
Awesome.
there we have it. I'm sorry. I'm counting the votes as they come in. I thought Bard was going to get it, and then it kind of. The people are even telling us the journey.
Oh, interesting.
Invoker to Bard, Weaver to start, Weaver to an Invoker.
I think the Weavers have it, but I think also Bards have it. So we could do either Weaver to Bard or just pick one of those.
Yeah, no, let's go Weaver to Bard. That's great. There's two kinds of pilots. This is another kind of little thing about TV writing. One is sort of what's often will be called the third episode pilot, which means the first episode is exactly what the third episode will be. So if it's like anything with a C and S and an I in it, it's basically every episode the same from the pilot. You're not establishing things. And the other is the premise pilot, where you're establishing, by the end of the pilot, you've established the premise of the series rather than just jumping into it immediately. So let's make this a premise pilot. And so we know we're going to start off with a Weaver, who we're like, that's a secret bard. That's cool too. And we'll get this character to become a bard. So it gives a little bit of an arc for that character in the pilot, which is always fun. So, okay, cool. I like it. Great. And let's continue with building out our main character here.
Cool. So I'm going to pull 2 cards here. Again, engine cards are the next card type. Engines are the motivations of the character, and I do think that the character's motivation is going to be pretty definitive of the series, so I think pulling extra cards for more options is good. So I've pulled 1 from fantasy, 1 from the main deck. So we have some options here. So from the main deck, we have, does this character want to defeat something? Or do they want to find peace within or for something? Or do they want to start a war on or with something? Or prevent a war from being started by someone or something?
I'm going to pick on this one. I'm going to go with wants to start a war. One of the things that a lot of people make the mistake of doing, which I also did as well when I started, was not going with the most active choice in TV and film. That doesn't mean it has to be over the top. It can be subtle, but it's got to be something that the main character can actively be doing. And I like the idea for a fantasy world that there's a potential war happening here. And that doesn't mean I'm using, and this is the way that I use the story engine cards. I don't necessarily go exactly with the, specifics of whatever the prompt is. I try to figure out how, what that might mean. I kind of take it in an abstract way. So the war doesn't necessarily mean like armies. This could be like a war on the injustice that's going on here.
Right.
So, okay, let's start. So and that gives us, what does it lead to?
That'll lead us to the anchor card next.
I'm going to say the comedy part has fallen off though. The deeper this goes, there's a lot of political intrigue, but
I will suggest that Parks and Rec is got a war on injustice going on, at least in the pilot.
Fair.
Yes.
I
also feel like there's one thing I found from doing a lot. There's something that I've seen a lot in D&D, and I think it does translate from roleplay to other situations. But that tension, whether it's dramatic, whether it's like horror based, is such a great backdrop for comedy to play against, because the higher the stakes are, the more those moments of like absurdity I think play, or the louder they become. So even if we did lean really hard into like doing this as like a really personal conflict, I still think that could be like a really interesting place to pull jokes out of. So
yes.
I've again pulled 2 anchor cards. So 1 from fantasy, 1 from the base deck. So from the base deck we have a portal, a key, a door, and an address. And from fantasy, we have an egg, an encampment, an eyrie, or a club. And this is who the Bard Weaver wants to start a war on or with. They could be starting a war with something as like their weapon or their provocation.
I'm gonna once again select this one, and we'll get back to writer's room in a second. I'm gonna go with encampment, and so, and just to address some of the questions about comedy. One of the ways to make so I worked on a show for Disney called Mech X4, which was a sci-fi, modern day sci-fi show, but it was a comedy, and I had done comedy in on Hercules and Xena. We had episodes that were comedic or very campy, but what I realized from working on the show with a bunch of full-on comedy writers who'd only done like sitcoms and single camera comedies was that one trick is to say you're going to war and make it the tiniest little reason why you're going to war. So we can definitely find, so if somebody's going to war over people are taking our land, that's one thing. If you're saying we're going to war because of the prices of, lollipops in this kingdom, you can start heading more in the comedy direction. So we're going to make sure we get to the comedy. Don't worry, everybody.
That's like Scottish war. That's like, it's like, oh, like I hurt your sister. Well, I kill your sister and your brother. Well, now I'll kill your sister and your brother and your parents. Now I'm going to burn down your village. It's like just the escalation that happens.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's keep going with our main character, and then we'll start from once we have these two sides built up, we'll start take pitches for what the show will be.
Amazing. So we'll add in a conflict card here. Conflict cards give kind of stakes to the story. So this might be an obstacle that the character has to overcome to get what they want, or it might be a consequence of them pursuing or getting what they want. So from the main deck we have, but it will mean letting their greatest rival get ahead, but the blame will fall on their closest friend. And then from the fantasy deck we have, but it will mean the end of wonder in the world, but they will suffer an injury that does not heal. And again, with these, this could be like an ongoing conflict, or this could be like a season 1 finale kind of like moment of this is what the consequence is if they go hard in on their goals.
Yes, and I'm gonna just point out I think Storyteller Treehouse has an excellent point there about the approaches of characters like causing the comedy, which is really another great way to do it because it comes out of the character. Yeah. I'm gonna let chat decide on this choice here.
All right, Murky, do you want to conduct our vote here?
Okay, so End of Wonder, blame friend, and then can you flip it over so I don't have to read upside down? Rival and injury. So End of Wonder, blame friend, rival, and injury. In 3, 2, 1, go.
While the chat votes are coming in, do you have any favorites on here, either Murky or George? Anything here that you're like, ooh, that's intriguing?
A couple. I mean, they're all interesting. I like the friend thing. I like the rival one, and I also like the wonder one a lot. That might right now be maybe a close number 1, but lots of good options here.
End of Wonder for me has like whimsy, and then the rival definitely has like a lot of that trope of like always just like clashing, like that whole idea of just like always clashing wills, which is really great for comedy and like adventure and all. Like, if we're talking going back to like the idea of outcasts coming together and they're valuing unity, but then you have rivalry. There's like a lot of interesting there, but I think injury got that one.
Well, let's keep rivalry too, because there were some votes for that. And I think you're right that could be a really good conflict engine for throughout the series. Having a secondary character as an antagonist, like I feel like we can get mileage out of that. If I may suggest, we'll go with a double here then.
That's great. And I would also say that injury can be anything from an actual physical wound of some kind to some other kind of injury. It could be an emotional injury. It could be a spiritual injury. It could be any kind of injury. So we can just keep that alive as a possibility.
Are you
Okay.
saving the makeup department from having to redo the scar every episode for the rest of
It,
the series?
it is expensive. I won't lie. Yes, it is. And also making sure it's done the right way every time takes time. So, so we unless it's underneath clothing. So, okay. So we have one more card type, if I'm remembering correctly.
Throw an aspect card on here. So again, I'll draw two. We can use one or both in this case. Aspects are just adjectives you can use to describe any other card. It could describe the war, the weaver, the bard, the encampment, the rival, the injury. So we have got blasphemous, plucky, bloodied, thorny, glorious, treacherous, witch granting, and cloying.
I think I'm just going to choose on this one, and to make sure we're heading in comedy direction, let's go with plucky.
Okay, we got our plucky bard weaver.
Yeah,
Cool.
that'll be fun.
On the side here.
Okay.
Plucky for bard.
Now, here's, I think, the way we'll proceed. Obviously, you can't have one character in a show, so we're going to have other characters, but I don't want to, go through and build all these characters yet. So we're just going to sort of bring in characters as we need them. So, and we'll just kind of go with more of a trope to begin with, like say, oh, we need the sidekick character, whatever we decide that we need to make the show work. Really what we need to figure out is what is the actual core conflict of what the show is going to be. So we've got a location that sounds like it's, there's a hidden artifact underneath the moraine, or underneath the settlement, probably underneath the settlement, because that it threatens more people and things. And the settlement's in the moraine, and then underneath the settlement, like built on top of this ancient artifact, unbeknownst to people, is the settlement. What I was thinking is that this is a town out in the middle of nowhere. All the outcasts from the will say that there's some kind of imperial nation that's very rigid, and everything has to be a very specific way. And these people have violated the rules, which they have to wear a certain kind of clothes, and they have to speak in a certain kind of way. And these are the people who refuse to go along with those things, or they accidentally violated the rules and were exiled. And so these are where all the outcasts of society wind up. So it's like, this is when the people who run away to the circus, this is the people that we're going to populate our world here. And because they're all outcasts, they are united as a result of that. That's what brings them together, even though they're very different people. So these people don't necessarily think the same way, or act the same way, or have the same kind of behaviors or goals or anything. But the one thing that they're united on is making sure that this is their home forever, and they feel like they belong here. And they've made this settlement into essentially a working town that has all the things you need to live and survive and thrive in this town. So I'm basically, what I'm going to let the writer's room do is come up with what the character, our weaver, is going to be up to at the beginning. I'm just sort of setting the stage for it. I think the change that has happened coming out of all the cards we've drawn, that's going to happen in this pilot, is that we're going to meet these people in their environment, in the status quo, what's their normal everyday lives, and we're seeing how it's dysfunctional, but it works. Like it's fun, it's funny. Think of like Community, the show Community. Like, all those people are in one location, and they're all kind of the outcasts in a certain way. They're all very different, but they're all still unified in, like, they need to, like, get this, get ahead in school. So that's who these people are. And I think the change that's going to happen in the pilot is that the Imperials have uncovered evidence that this artifact may in fact be buried underneath the settlement, and they're going to arrive, and they want to start digging and find this artifact. And so the idea is they're going to set up this encampment, and they are going to spend at least the rest of this season, maybe the entire series, but at least the rest of the season, trying, basically digging up this entire town for an artifact that may or may not actually be there, and essentially disrupting the lives of in different ways of all these people. And because they're so rigid, and there's like Moroki was talking about earlier, there's like permits for everything, like everything's got to be done such a precise way. And these people are literally the complete polar opposite of that. There's going to be an immediate clash between the two that was going to lead to some kind of war, because this is an unjust act that the Imperials, this is the place that they built. They were outcasts. The Imperials, this is not even part of Imperial territory. It's out on the frontier. This is unjust. This is a great injustice. And somehow our people who are, not necessarily the best people to lead a revolt of some kind or overcome an entity with vast resources. They're like the bad news bears of fighting, colonial injustice, have to figure out a way with no resources to try to inhibit this search for the artifact, but ideally get these Imperials to leave them alone and leave the settlement. So I think that's our basic premise of the location. We still don't have a story yet, though. We've just got our setup. Now what we need is the story of the characters, and this is our main character, so we're mostly going to be following this character. And obviously, you probably all know this, but in a TV series, you've got your threads, storylines divided in terms of how prominent they are in the series. So you've got the A, B, C, D, all the way down to what's called, in a comedy especially, a runner. So a runner is just the same thing that happens over and over again with a twist at the end. It's not an arc or anything like that. So what we're really focusing on now is the A story. So we're going to need to have this character will be the star of our A story, maybe participating in some of the other storylines. But we need to figure out why this character may not be on board with going to war against these people to begin with, or maybe they're the leaders of it. I don't know. But let's talk about. Let's have the writers' room decide if this character. What I'm trying to think of a good way to frame this to start with. We've already talked about the idea this is an underdog story, and I like that. That's great. Let's decide on, based on the cards, some kind of personality trope for this character, just to start with. I like to start with tropes because we're promising the audience a certain kind of experience. And I like to start with the things they expect and then go from there. Sometimes do the opposite of that, or sometimes do a twist on that. And I remember there's a quote from Quentin Tarantino that I always liked, which was, "You always have to deliver the genre goods."
Right.
So we got to do that. So what kind of trope do you think this character might embody? And this could be like the introspective bookworm, or whatever you want to say. Why don't I give some suggestions, because that'll make it easier for voting. And also, if Moroki or Peter, you have one, we can do with that.
I know I have this brainwave of, like, since you were talking about Parks and Rec and like Leslie.
I was also thinking this is a Leslie nope.
Yeah, and also like very crusadery, and assuming that the person, I think we said weaver to bard, but if the person was like a plucky bard to begin with, like maybe the war, if you're doing a war on justice, it's like they're very advocating. They have like no resources, but they're like singing about the injustice like loudly on the streets like every day. It's like, guys, we need to like rise up against this. I'm like, let me tell you, and they like burst into some like really terribly written song about about injustice all the time. And maybe they're not like winning people over because they're almost like too much, but like also is charming certain people, possibly as like a reason for this. I know I might be deviating away a little bit, but I was kind of digging this little pitch that Bronwyn threw in about the poor Imperial schmuck spends an entire episode trying to find someone who will give him a permit to start digging. And you were talking about like the storyline. I don't remember if you said C or D, or like the repetitive thing, but I can almost see that as just being like a running joke. It's like part of the reason. It's like everyone's trying to start a war on this encampment, but the reason why this powerful Imperial thing with all the resources hasn't successfully started yet is because there's just literally like the Department of Digging doesn't have a permit, and there's like a schmuck, like every episode there's a schmuck trying to find like a permit, and that can actually like let the arc like play out, and then suddenly in episode 8 or 9 or like 10 it'd be like then the permit actually goes through, and that's where you suddenly get climax for that particular season. So what was like a joke suddenly turns into like the real crisis point as they do get the permit to start digging.
I like that. That's a great pitch. So one of the things that happens in a writer's room, basically the entire time you're there, is everybody is pitching ideas. Whether that's for a character, that's for a storyline, that's for a joke, that's for a poignant moment, whatever it is, or an entire episode idea, whatever it might be. And you're going around the room and everybody's pitching ideas, and people are piggybacking off of other people's ideas. And thankfully, there is always a writer's assistant who's getting this all down, so you can review it later. Because sometimes you'll be like, "What was that idea that you said before?" Like, I forget what it was. So you can at least review the tape and figure out what it was. On top of that, as a corollary, sometimes what happens is you go, "Oh, that idea we had earlier, actually, this idea is going to trump that. This is a better idea. We're going to reverse course on the original idea." So I like the idea this character is a bard and is going to be sort of that crusader type. I think that's really fun. So let's say that maybe this character is always been a bard, but basically doesn't make, like most music. My wife is a musician. Most musicians doesn't make any money. And so in order to like make ends meet, also does some weaving as a day job, but doesn't identify as a weaver, identifies as a bard. So I like
think their
that.
last name should definitely be Weaver, so everyone knows them as a Weaver. Like that's the family name, and it's the thing that they're constantly straining against.
Yes, and it's the one thing they know, they were brought up learning how to do, and so it's the only skill they have that people are willing to pay for, and they hate that about knowing that.
It's like every time they come in, they're like, "Can you like weave me this thing?" They're like, "Yes, but let me like show you this cool new song I just wrote." And they're like, "No, Fred, no."
Yeah, talking about, speaking of Monty Python, like, no singing.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe they are like as an underdog bard, so no one really likes this character's songs, but will eventually have this character sort of leading the charge. And their songs still aren't great, but their heart is in the right place. And so this is maybe as a way to kind of take advantage of that unity we talked about to get the whole town on board with dealing with this problem together, rather than each person sort of having, imagine there's like a town meeting, and maybe this would be in the pilot episode where people are like, "This is an injustice. We need to do something about it." And then everybody has a completely different idea about how to deal with it. And our main character is the one who's got to unite them all in this
literally weave all the different things together.
Oh, that's good.
And if I can build on I also love the idea of this like Leslie Knope character who's the crusader, who's like all in, and maybe their like effort, determination, and grit is far above their skill and execution with a lot of things. But as a bard, I think it could be it also has a Leslie Knope trait, trying to be helpful all the time, like almost honor bound to be helpful. I think could be interesting for a character getting into too many scrapes or situations, spreading themselves too thin.
Yes.
And I would pitch as an option here. Bards also traditionally are knowledge holders, lore keepers. If they are the person who knows the most about the artifact and the history of the artifact, they have they know which manuscript or legend or riddles or carved in a stone behind a waterfall where the information about it is. So when the Imperials come looking, if there's an Imperial character who's also kind of a foil to that, who's like the lore nerd, who's not necessarily here to conquer, they're here because they're interested in the history. And there's this connection with the Bard where the Bard wants to be helpful. The Bard knows all these things about the artifact, and the Bard is the person that the Imperials are probably going to for information. And I can see a lot of both drama and comedy in the wanting to help, wanting to be helpful, caring about history, having someone who actually cares about the history of this artifact when no one else in the town does, because it's a small town and they don't necessarily care about the things the Bard cares about. But also them wanting to protect the town's interests, not give information to the Imperials. I do think it could be interesting for both the drama of mixed loyalties and the comedy of again having one character like Leslie Knope who cares so much more about things than anybody else, and who finally finds someone who cares as much as they do about something, but they can't trust them or lean into that. I think could be really interesting.
I could see
I
that
love it.
whole. I could see that whole like they meet. It's that whole like I meet you, and I know we talked about rivals earlier because that person could be a bit of a rival because they are on the opposing faction. And it's like a competition of their knowledge and how they gain it. But it's like that whole like I don't want them to win, but if that new person who's coming in who's part of the Imperials and is not as familiar, and if they say something inaccurate, I could see the Bard character being like, I want to correct them, but I also like
Right.
know if I correct them, they'll have knowledge. Like the enemy will have more knowledge. Kind of
Actually,
thing.
the last known location was this specific place. I mean,
Exactly. I love all of that. I think what can be fun about that character, the Imperial character, can be that nobody in this town cares about any of this information. And now suddenly somebody has come, and now the Bard is someone who actually wants to talk about this, who actually wants to hear the songs about this, but doesn't want to actually give them the information. So it's like they kind of have this interesting relationship with this character that's not like just pure antagonist protagonist. It's like, oh, but there are those mirrors like you find, you and I are just alike, those kind of things that you get in a lot of stories. So I think that would be really fun to play with. That can give that character, that Imperial character, more of a story. So it's not just like, oh, it's just the token bad person. It's actually, they're on the wrong side, but they actually like the exact same things as our main character. And maybe they could eventually work things out. Who knows? So keep that kind of, fun play of like, are they going to be, they're kind of frenemies. Are they going to end up enemies or friends? Which way is it going to go? So I love all of that. That's great.
That's where you get the renewal for season 2, when like at the end they end up at like the point of crisis where one like the Imperial has to decide to pick a side, and we have to determine whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. Are going to betray the main character, and then you end it as a cliffhanger, and then you're like, give me a season 2, damn it.
Yes, and actually that is a good point, because what you always have to think about, and not get too far ahead of yourself, but you also you always have to think about, that's good too, as far as said, and for enemies to friends to lovers, is renewing the show and I mean that in two senses of the word, for each season. So A, getting them to want to have you do another season, but B, how do you renew the show in terms of what you're going to do? So you're not just replicating what you did in the previous season. So like The Crown is like a really, extreme example of that, because you're in different time periods, or you even have different actors, etc. But you want there to be a fresh take on whatever the story is. Like, or Stranger Things is another example of like where they're always trying to come in at a different angle, if they can, on the same world with their same characters who've grown in some way in terms of relationships or personally, etc. So that's a good thing definitely to think about, like where this can go, and starting farther back so that you give yourself some runway to like get 5 seasons if you can. Where even though this is an inside baseball thing, but usually shows don't get more than 3 seasons anymore. That's sort of like the limit these days.
I was even going to ask you a question based on that, because this is something that I have observed in watching shows where, I found like historically some shows end with these intense cliffhangers, like, almost to kind of indicate like we're really trying to set up for a new season, and then they get canceled. And next thing you know, you usually have these shows that they just leave you, right? Like they just gut you and just leave you with nothing. I'm also seeing shows now sometimes where like the season always wraps up neatly in a bow. So if it doesn't get renewed, you get your closure. If there is a renewal, then at least you can kind of start afresh a little bit with some like a new story, a new adventure. And I'm starting to also find like these kind of in-betweens. It's like, here's sort of closure, but here's sort of like a possibility for something and this is even in films. I find like, especially now with like some of the big MCU stuff, right? Like you get these arcs. It's like they close, but then like but then a new movie pops out because it was so popular. They're like, well, I guess we're making another one. It's like, but we wrapped it up so nicely. Or ones end like so ambiguously where you're like, are we gonna get another one, or is that it, right? Because like I said, rule of 3, there's been a couple films where I'm like, oh, it's over now, like 3, but then there's another one that shows up and I'm like, well, there was clearly some sort of marketing reason or business reason why they did that. Do you find that there's a certain trend to how like shows now are being ended per season, that people are trying to balance kind of like the storytelling needs. This is like a little bit of that like creator versus business side, right? Like trying to find a way to kind of appease the storytelling side to like the business side of things that are making, you know, the final decision whether a show gets pulled or not.
Yes, that's another good question, and then we'll definitely get into the lore because that'll be important for our show. There are definitely trends for a long time, and you all have recognized this. Like there was the Game of Thrones effect, where like everything had to like have the same kind of cliffhangery kind of endings every season. Everything was very dark. Or Breaking Bad was another part of that. Had to be very dark. Everything was incredibly serialized. And that has changed recently for a variety of reasons. The trend is now toward procedurals, like Doctor Lawyer, hospital shows, or Monster of the Week shows like Buffy or something like that, or X-Files. And this new thing that's called, I've heard two names for it. One of them is procedural, which is a procedural mashup, meaning that it's a procedural. Every episode has a beginning, middle, and end, but there is a thread that goes through the whole season. So just a bad example off the top of my head of that would be, going back to an old show, would be the show, because we're talking about kind of having comedy in this, Cheers. So there was a Sam and Diane will they, won't they thing, or Friends, Ross Rachel storyline that was continuous all the way through the whole series, but each episode had its own beginning, middle, and end for all of this plot lines. So that's another thing that everywhere I go, they're like, do you have a procedural? Do you have a procedural? Like, well, I do now. So that is sort of the trend at the moment. And also the other trend tonally is less dark, more hopeful, more aspirational, more fun. And I think it's partly related just to the time we're in, et cetera. But it's definitely true everywhere I go. And that's anybody from Netflix to Hulu to NBC, whatever. They're all kind of on the same page right now. Generally, that doesn't mean they're not doing other shows too, but generally they're emphasizing those kinds of shows more than they have in the past 10, 12 years, something like that.
I'm a brain candy watcher, so I am all for light and hopeful. My life is too dark and stressful. Remember, dramatic actor here. Only angst in my life, and I only want to watch brain candy at night. So we're going to dig further into the lore. I'm going to continue down the candy rabbit hole.
Yes, and I will just point out one thing that often what I learned in doing this comedy show with all these comedy writers is that often the darkest people are the funniest people. So there you go. You've got both.
Well, I'm excited for that. More candy.
Yeah, exactly.
More lollipops. More inflation on lollipops, please.
Exactly. All right. Let us talk about so Peter, you were thinking lore of the artifact specifically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Which I will say the Lore Masters deck has the dedicated object type card for building out different prompts related to the significance or the traits of an object. So we could pull some cards there.
And I want to mention one quick thing here that I do on that note is when I'm using the story. So I use the story engine cards quite a bit, and I'll sometimes use them when I don't know what I'm doing, like for an overall thing or even just a specific scene or a specific location. But sometimes I'll have a pretty good idea of what I want to do, but it's very tropey. I'm like, I've seen this before a million times. And then I'll bring the story engine cards out and I'll have my first card because let's say I know who the character is. So my agent card will just be a placeholder because I already know that's my agent. This is who I have. And I'll just start building around that character. So in a way, we're kind of doing that here, it seems like.
Yeah, we know it's an artifact. We don't necessarily know what kind of object it is, so we could get some details on that or some suggestions for that, and then potentially assign it a couple of traits. I would actually, normally with Lore Master's deck, you fill out all four sides of the card with a bunch of different prompts. Because we know so much about this object already, like where it is, what significance it has, I don't think we need to fill it out, but it might be good to get a couple details in place.
Yeah.
The other one is one of my favorite expansions to play with from the story engine, which I might actually graft onto Lore Master's deck here, is the it's the unique items expansion, Cursed Curios, but it has a bunch of really interesting item properties that have a lot of narrative storytelling potential for like the way the object works, like special things you have to do to activate it, or unusual effects that it has. So pulling just like a pile of prompts and just seeing if there's anything that we want to fish through that looks interesting for establishing what this artifact means or does, I think could be good. So we're going to do a bit of weird combo here. We're going to pull a Lore Masters deck main card, a few Lore Masters deck properties, maybe a couple of Story Engine unique items properties, and then we'll just see if anything works. Basically, it's my pitch for how to learn more about this. If that appeals,
sounds good.
I mean, I think the this is where sometimes I find my engineering brain gets in the way. But I'm always fascinated, like with both, like hearing from you, George, today, and regularly watching Peter, is how often you guys choose to like utilize the deck to serve your purposes in the moment, right? And actually something I would be interested in hearing from chat as well, like when you guys are creating, when you're using decks, like how often do you combine the different decks together? How often do you deviate from the quote unquote guide of how to use it sequentially? Because I know for me, a lot of times it's like I'm going to go through the process every single time, start to finish. There's no corner tucks in my life. I'm very like start to finish, like rigid kind of way. And I wouldn't say, oh, let's just pull an object card from Lore Master's deck and flush it around. A lot of times I kind of rely on Peter to kind of give me that prompt. So I actually, this is where there's like a brain fluidity in the way you guys use the deck that I really appreciate and envy a little bit.
Well, so the decks were designed to map the inside of my brain, so it's kind of like I'm good at speaking a language that I made up. You know what I mean? Like there's a reason that I speak it fluently. It's just because it's all the things that I made up for how I wanted it to work for me. So that's where that comes from. But
when Peter first was like showing me Lore Master's deck when we were developing the campaign and developing the deck, he kind of went from level 1 to level 8. Immediately when talking, I had to be like, no, Peter, go back to level 101 for Moroki, please. Like, give me the step-by-step. Don't break the rules for me yet.
But it needs to operate at all levels. So it's always good to have that, like to have an eye on every level of its operation to make sure that it like feels intuitive or makes sense.
So I was going to say that either, we can go your way, Peter, draw objects and then the other thing I was just interested in also hearing is like, maybe in one of the next prompts we're drawing, I would like to just even see George take us through like one of those processes, whether it's like I've already created an agent and I'm crafting around it just so that like chat and folks can just see how that creative process works. But let's do this first.
Cool. All right. Well, let's see. And I'll throw this over to you, George. Are any of these prompts looking interesting to you? So here's a story engine card with some objects on it: a flute, a drum, a crossbow, a gathering place, and then from Lore Master's deck we've got a warhead, a guitar, a face mask, a tent, a machete, a brush, a belt, and a box. Do any of those sound like interesting artifacts?
There's a lot of options here. I would let chat do it, but I think we'll only get one for each. So I'm just going to, I like the idea of a warhead. And the reason is twofold. One, that sounds like something the Imperials would desperately want to have. And easily makes us feel like this is, a bad idea in many ways. And secondly, there's this element of danger there, that there's a warhead buried underneath your town. So I think let's go with that. And it's the fantasy version of a warhead, so we'll figure out what that means. Maybe with some surrounding cards.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here I'm pulling some random prompts here.
And we'll let chat pick from these ones.
Okay, so then in that case, because there's going to be a bunch of options again, I think chat, let's have you, name your favorite, and then we'll narrow down that. We'll use that as the pool that we select from. Or maybe we'll just do card by card, and then we can vote a little bit.
What if we just did two from, like have chat just pick from, we'll pick two of these, one from from one deck and one from the other deck.
Okay.
Just use one of each.
Okay, so chat, you'll be voting on one of these 8 options here. So these are the unusual items deck properties. These tend to be a bit more, a little bit more random. So sometimes finding that right match means pulling an extra card so you have options. So we have that increases dexterity, coated with something indestructible, that contains a pocket dimension, and recharged by prayer. We have that manipulates sound, made of smoke, that warps magic in its vicinity, and powered by the souls of its victims.
Oh my god.
So you can go ahead and vote for Dexterity, Indestructible, Pocket Dimension, Prayer, Sound, Smoke, Warp's Magic, or Souls of Victims. And you can go ahead and vote in 3, 2, 1, go.
Kind of digging the pocket dimension.
There's a bunch of good options on here. Yeah. I mean, one thing that happens also when that's different from novel writing, let's say, is that in novel writing, you make every decision. Whereas if you're doing a TV series, what if the actor gets hurt and you don't have the actor for that episode, like I mentioned? Or what if you lose a location that you were planning to, use in your series finale? Or what if you have a budget issue and you now can't afford to do the VFX you were deciding to do, wanted to do? And you have to think, and this could happen, even in a small way. Like I was on set once on a show, and there was a door that was supposed to be barred, so to trap somebody inside, and they put the bar on the wrong side of the door by mistake.
Yeah.
And we were shooting, and we had 30 extras, and it was a nighttime shoot, and we were about to, we had a specific cutoff time. We couldn't go past it. And we had to think come up with a way to deal with the situation immediately and shoot it. And literally we had 5 minutes to come up with a solution, which we ultimately did. But it was, you never know when you're gonna have to deal with some random occurrence that you then have to weave into the storytelling of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And also maintaining flexibility to do, maintaining, I guess, because I can see, someone asked a question earlier, and I know we discussed it a little bit, but it was talking about creative control, because we made that comment about 90% democracy, 10% dictatorship, and I think about, I guess, if you are a writer in a writer's room, you probably have to be a lot more open to having your ideas discarded all the time, which especially if you're a novel writer, if you're used to solo writing, could be a very painful thing for your ego.
Yes, that is a very good point. And I think that's one of the things that writers, when you're first starting out, learn sometimes the hard way, but should always know that it's never about you. It is just whatever the best idea is. Nobody, only somebody who doesn't know what they're doing would refuse to take in a good idea from a low level person. Put it that way. If you have a good idea, people are going to take it. Or you might have an idea that's not so good. Usually we will preface whatever we're saying with here's the bad idea, or here's the bad version, even if we think it's a good version. Yeah. Because then it's sort of you already go yeah, this may not fly, but here's my bad version. What if XYZ happens? And people might say, no, that doesn't work. Or they might say that doesn't totally work, but that gives me an idea. What if it's this? And you build off of each other. And what's most important really is to be able to talk in the room. Don't sit there in silence. You want to give ideas. Don't give the same idea over and over and over again, because people will get annoyed, especially the showrunner. And also pick your moments. If you're this idea, I don't even know what I'm going to say exactly. Don't raise your hand and try to say something. Wait till you're I have an idea. And then if you feel it's worth saying out loud, then do it. But you definitely can't sit there in silence, because they won't even bring you back, because they're not contributing anything in the room. Yeah. Did we get a winner?
We got, the one that got the most number of votes fastest in this case was Powered by the Souls of Its Victims.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead with that, which I do think there's a lot of drama in that, and again could be comedy.
Yes, I'm going to start to yes, you're totally right. And I always tell the script coordinator and the writer assistant this exact same thing, because one of the shows I was on, our writer assistant, I gave her that advice, and she started doing it. And ultimately, the showrunner was like, hey, we should maybe give you an episode. And so she got an episode out of that, freelance episode. So that, yes, you're totally right.
I think it's another interesting, you're talking about you have to be willing to raise your hand and share your ideas, because writing can also be such an introverted thing. For a lot of people who don't go into TVs, if you're writing novels, it's such a solo act. And then you're basically trying to challenge writers to be opinionated extroverts, which is
Yes.
like a really which is not a skill set that they always teach you in school if you're developing your craft as a writer, right?
Well, and
Yeah.
I will give some advice on that specific thing, being an introvert myself, which is that, and I'm sure most of you know this already, but I learned it over time, which is that really the core difference between introvert and extrovert is how you gain and expend energy. And so what I know I need to do to be able to talk in the room, especially when I was starting out, was I'd have to have things that I like to do outside of work that rejuvenated me and gave me my energy back. And gaming was definitely one of them. Like I used to be in 3 games a week. And for whatever reason, like that always got ideas sparking and replenished my creativity. But it could be reading a novel or listening to an audiobook or, just, doing, word puzzles or whatever. But it's really I think it's really important to find those things so you sort of know that you have those to rely on so that you can get back in the room and you're refreshed.
Yeah, and speaking of playing games, you can catch George playing TTRPGs live on Dungeon Musings if you visit youtube.com/c/Dungeon Musings. So still play.
Yeah, it's a fun channel. It's all for charity right now. It's for a children's charity all around the world, and we play every possible game. And while we none of us are actors or improvisers in any way, we have a good time. It's fun, and there is definitely a narrative element in all the games that we wind up playing. So we are very focused on our characters and our story threads with our characters. But we also do a lot of actual game playing of games that are incredibly popular and games no one's ever heard of. So, and there's like 8 years worth of stuff on there at this point.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely go check out Dungeon Musings on YouTube. You can find their live stream schedule there. And I'm realizing because we're getting a little bit shorter on time, what I might do for the second property card, I did pull an object card. I'm going to suggest an idea here, and you can let me know if you...
Great.
I think sentient, the warhead being sentient, as well as powered by the souls of victims, making the warhead a character in some way, I think, or having some kind of entity or presence to it would be... I think there's a lot we could do with that.
Yes. Okay, that is great. Okay, so now I think what we would need to do. So obviously there will be other characters involved. There will be other characters that we would have figured out, etc. But we're gonna not worry about that, like I said. And I really want to. What will determine what characters we need is what kind of show this is. So we know that this is a dramedy, and we know it's fantasy. We didn't pick what we would describe as the format being a procedural or like basically an episodic show, where there's always a beginning, middle, and end, or if it's if we're doing a serialized show. So I think that could be a vote that we do. Do we want to be a procedural? And that could be again, I know I'm referencing old shows, but because most of these shows were all procedurals at the time or episodics, that's like Xena or X-Files or Buffy, something like that. Do you want that's episodic? Serialized is your Game of Thrones, your Breaking Bad, like or any of those shows in that era of time. So let's decide what we want to do, and that'll start telling us what we need to do in our pilot to establish that for the audience.
Okay, so we're going to vote on episodic and procedural.
Or episodic and serialized.
Sorry, episodic and serialized. Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
So go ahead and vote for episodic or serialized in the chat in 3, 2, 1, go. And
I literally voted for procedural earlier, so clearly I want this. And we were talking Parks and Rec, so my brain has started. But actually, now since we were joking about the sentient warhead, I started thinking a little bit of What We Do in the Shadows as well, because in What We Do in the Shadows, they often there's always like this big thing at the end of each season, usually like a big bad or a big event that happens, but then they always like weirdly kind of make it inconsequential or integrate into the main storyline. It's not like, oh, they defeated the big bad and it goes away. It's like, no, now this is just part of our landscape. So like, they bring back, like this old Baron and Duke, and you're like, oh no, he's angry. And then at the end, he just ends up with an apartment. And he just becomes a regular character. The comedy side, it's like there's this dangerous warhead. It's powered by the souls and it's sentient. And then when Peter was talking about, oh, it becomes a character, I'm like, oh my God, like what if they uncover this warhead? and it just like develops a personality. And somehow in like the following season, it's now just like, I don't know, the like wise man warhead. Like they put in a temple or they put in a room, and everyone just starts going to it with opinions because it has just like eons of souls worth of memories to advise people on stuff. And he's just this like ongoing character, but he's a warhead. So I went down to What We Do in the Shadows style of serializing.
That's a great example of what will happen in a room. Like it'll be quick references. Like, what if we do something like, you know, Empire Strikes Back, or what if we do a storyline later? What if we have a character like that kind of character to kind of get the ball rolling on things? So that is a good example of what a conversation might happen in a room.
Mm-hmm.
I love all these suggestions people are making. It's really great.
Yeah. Well, I think serialized have it. I think we'll call it there for serialized.
Okay, so then I want to, here's the other thing really quickly to vote on, which is how we're going to end the season, and that'll tell us what we need to do in the pilot. So do we want, here are the 3 possible outcomes. 1, the Imperials get the warhead. 2, the warhead remains, it's not found. So it's not found. Or 3, our main character excavates the warhead and has possession of it.
Okay, so we'll go ahead in the chat and vote Imperials, main character, or Lost, I guess. We'll call it
Lost, yeah.
Still buried. Still buried.
Yeah. Yeah, so still buried. Okay, so Imperials, main character, or still buried, and you can go ahead and vote in 3, 2, 1, go.
And as the votes are coming in, there was this note from Farah talking about like getting your energy back, being an introvert, extrovert, and we don't have the energy for things that give you the energy back. And I think that's something that probably a lot of us feel. I know we shared some like content very recently talking about writer burnout or just creative burnout and how to write in burnout, especially like when a lot of us in the, over here, at least in Toronto and Halifax, we're dealing with winter blahs at the fullest in the darkness, and or a lot of us feel the pressures of life and every day. And I'll say this as a person who like works a lot, Farah. Like I probably work more than I really should, and I definitely don't really have time to read, like to even engage in the activities I want. But sometimes it's like, you know what, you have to start with your care. So sometimes it is sleep. Like sometimes the first things you need to do is honor your rest and honor your rejuvenation and health. So it's like food, fitness, sleep, do those things, and then add those things on, right? And for those who are running out of energy and feel things or it's really hard, and I'm not saying like it's easy, but one thing I've really learned, especially as I've gotten older, is I think when you're young and you're really hungry, you push yourself to the max all the time, and you're like always driving because you believe that your life will be over if you don't succeed by a certain time. And then when I hit my 30s, I started realizing, I'm like, if I don't take care of myself, I literally will not be able to do the things that I'm setting out to do to achieve my goals. If I do not value my sleep, I'm not going to have the cognitive capability to be creative. If I don't value my health, I'm not going to have like the ability to feel good enough to work because I'm too busy worrying about this long-standing injury I have or this damage I have to like my head and my neck. I see that a lot in visual artists. Like I knew a lot of comic writers who were developing things like carpal tunnel and issues because all they did was draw, and they didn't do anything to kind of manage that, right?
Yeah.
And it's just something I just kind of always advise now. It's like, I'm not saying it's easy because, when you're trying to balance like different jobs, different gigs, put food, like make money, there's a lot of things. But I always say like it is a choice, and you have to make that choice for yourself because, in this world, you're going to have to care for yourself and advocate for yourself because a lot of times there's not too many people who can advocate for you.
I will just add to that I have been definitely an overachiever my entire life and never wanted to, waste a second of time. And I learned the lesson the hard way that you can't live that way, as a creative person, and physically, because if you're on set for 14, 16 hours a day, every day, 6 days every week, you need to have the stamina to do that. And you won't be able to unless you are, you're in a good state when you arrive to be on set, but also creatively because of burnout, etc. So I think that's a really good point to make and good for people to know as early as possible.
Yeah.
How did we end up?
So the main character has the vote by majority, but we have a very specific pitch from Storyteller Treehouse on Imperials
Great.
get it, but setting up a season 2 as a ragtag heist to get it back.
Oh, that's
But
cool.
acknowledging that that depends on the future of the show, trying to make season 1 satisfying with the Imperials getting it could be challenging. We could also save that for like a season 2 to season 3 and pick a different beat for season 1. But it
Yes.
seems like
Well,
main characters has the votes.
I mean, the main character could uncover it, but the Imperials could get it by the end of season 2 if the season continues.
I would say these are all great pitches. I like them all. My gut instinct right now would be, in terms of current trends, is to have the main character get it, so we have sort of a satisfying positive conclusion, because we're doing an underdog story. You always want the underdog to have some kind of win.
Right.
That doesn't mean that now that has not created a massive complication that's going to set up season 2. As a result of doing this. The other thing I would mention, I like the Imperials getting it could work also. It doesn't necessarily have to be a downer. It could be that it's a bittersweet kind of ending, and the characters wind up doing something that's the right thing to do and feel good about their decision, but ultimately, unfortunately, our Imperials wind up getting the warhead. So, especially when we're doing a dramedy, you could play with either side of those things. I think since we got the most votes for main character getting it, we'll go with that. I like that, and I also can see how that would set up a really fun season 2 character-wise. If somebody pitched this, I can't remember who it was. Somebody in the chat pitched the idea that all the souls that are trapped in the warhead then become characters in the show and maybe are talking. Maybe the only person that can hear the souls is our main character. Somehow maybe the main character winds up having some kind of connection to this artifact, it turns out, and it's the only person who can hear it, and no one believes. And we didn't say this is a male character, female character, or whatever. To me, I would just figure that out at some point later. I've been on shows that had all different types of people in the leads, and I think it could work with whoever we wind up choosing, or somebody we knew we wanted to work with, etc. But whoever that is, I think it'll be fun for that character to be the one who's like, wait, I'm listening. Hold on, everybody. Okay, they're saying that you think they should all come to my next show. Oh, really? Okay. The warhead says it's going to go off unless you guys come to my next show. I don't know. Sure. Yeah, they says it's true. I don't know. Whatever. You could have a lot of fun, whether it's comedy, drama, whatever you want to do with that. So I think that's really a fun pitch.
Another one that could be interesting, it could be like the main character gets the warhead, but to play on that conflict about it means letting their greatest rival get ahead. Maybe it's not the main character who can hear the warhead, it's the rival. So they get the warhead, so they manage to uncover it, and it's like, maybe if it stayed uncovered, maybe if it stayed buried, no one would ever, it would have been all fine. But because the main character wanted to uncover it because they think it's gonna help them defeat the Imperials, the rival gets ahead in terms of a knowledge base because they can actually communicate with all these souls. And it's like, oh my God, I didn't want to work with you, but now I really have to because you're freaking getting all this. You're the only one who's talking to the warhead now.
Yeah, that's great too. I love it. That could totally work. Or it can maybe even switches at some point because the warhead doesn't like whatever one of them is doing and is unhappy and gets mad. And there's maybe there's a relationship there that could be fun too. These are all great.
You can see the main character with that Imperial being like, I don't want to talk to you ever again. You're the worst person on earth. We're enemies, and they part ways. And then you have to slink, you have to sulkily go back and be like, hey, how are you?
Right, exactly.
Here's a beer.
That could be really fun and funny. Yeah, that's great. I love it. Let's then talk about, let's kind of come, all the way back down to the ground floor, because that was sort of the 100,000 foot view, to our main character. In the course of the pilot, do we think this character should have to? So I think what this character needs to be trying to accomplish in terms of the plot goal is to unite the town to essentially get rid of the Imperials as a long-term goal. We're going to, they're going to have different approaches, like people have mentioned, and some people maybe not on board. Maybe some people are making more money because the Imperials are renting out the Airbnb that they have or whatever. So I think the main character goal-wise is going to try to unite the people as much as they can be united, given who these people are. They'll always have different differences, so that'll add to our comedy and some drama. But does the main character, in order to accomplish that, do we think the main character has to change? So meaning that there's a flaw that they have to overcome by the end of this pilot that will then allow them to figure out how to unite everybody? Or is this character what would often be called a steadfast character who has to stick to their guns basically by the end of the episode, and like even though everything's going wrong for them and gets worse and worse and more painful to do this, they have to just dig down deep to actually get people on the same page. And so what just came to my mind, which I don't know if everybody will know this movie, but maybe was the movie Goonies. And Sean Astin is a steadfast character in that movie. Like he's the one who gets all the Goonies united, even though they're all, like at each other's throats in different ways and annoying each other, including his older brother and the other older characters in the movie. And he has a great speech kind of in the middle that like kind of gets them all to be Goonies together and like win the day, get the treasure, etc. So do we want this character in the pilot to be a steadfast character who has to, stick to their guns, or is this a change character who has to overcome a flaw? So steadfast or change. There's the two options. I'll count down for this one. 3, 2, 1, go.
I think, those are both, they would both be really interesting choices. I definitely like that idea, like you say, that maybe there are some people who are getting a little bit on board with the Imperials. Maybe it's one of those, I think it's from Life of Brian, Monty Python, like, what have the Romans ever done for us? Except for roads, aqueducts, healthcare. Like, this outcast town is seeing, like, money and technology and stability for the first time. So a lot of people are like, ooh. And part of what our bard is doing is trying, like, they must have some nefarious plot they're after. I have to prove to the town that there's the ulterior motive. And maybe they don't know that they're here for the warhead at first. And it's like the reveal at the end of episode 1 is them getting that evidence and like calling the town in, laying down the map that shows all these dig sites where they've started to plan to dig. And then we start to see like that's the season arc. And they know that they're gonna have to work very hard to keep the town on side because there are so many temptations or whatever for regional.
I think that's great.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that trope where like sometimes like a character is moved to change and they're like, maybe I am wrong. And then but then something is revealed at the end that realizes that they actually were correct from the very beginning. I know sometimes when I watch it, I don't love it because you're like going on this journey and you're like, oh, everything's good. And then you're like, realize it kind of goes back to square one. But it also has a comedic effect sometimes as well, right? So
totally, you can either one can work, and a lot of times the traditional feeling of people who talk about storytelling is that every character has to change, but I that's definitely not true. I would say most of the time the main character changes, but sometimes the main character is changing everybody else, like in Goonies. Or there's a movie called October Sky. It's a great movie, and that's a steadfast character, like who's getting everybody else on there. Like the dad in that movie winds up changing, and it's very poignant and amazing moment at the end there. So you can really do either one. The only thing to bear in mind when you're doing a steadfast character, because I'd be like, oh, it's sort of a flat character though. It's kind of boring. It's like, no, you have to throw so many obstacles at them that they might think, like Moroki said, think about changing because maybe they're wrong. And then they come through at the end and like double down and they're like, no, I know I'm right. And they potentially succeed, however, whatever kind of movie you're doing, whether there's a happy ending or not, you decide. But in many cases, it's a happy ending and they were right the whole time, but they had to face all these challenges and like prove that they were right by the end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the changes habit from the votes.
Okay.
Here.
All right. So I know we're running low on time. Here's what I want to do to simulate like a true writer's room for this last part. So this is going to be, and maybe there's not enough time for people to think about this, or maybe you've already thought about it. We need to come up with our A storyline for the first episode. Peter was kind of suggesting a possibility, I think, that involves like finding out why the Imperials are here. Maybe they're very tight-lipped about it and they're not telling anybody or something like that. But let's incorporate who the main character is. So what do we think? What is the collision between the main character and our, advent of the Imperials arriving in town and starting to dig up the town? What is the main character's what is the story that we're watching unfold? So that could be, this character has to, this character, maybe this character is a bard, but never plays out. Maybe they don't want to show their music, and they have to overcome that reluctance to like expose themselves and be vulnerable. The only way to unite these people is by doing that. And the way that this character becomes vulnerable is by playing this song that's really special and important to them that they've never shown anybody, or something like that. So just to give you an example, does anybody have any suggestion for what that might be, like in a sentence or two? And then this is exactly what would happen in a writer's room. Like we would be like, we have a new episode to do, or I've even been on shows where we were doing this with the pilot. We were actually creating the pilot in the room. And so we started with like a very basic premise, tone, very basic ideas of the characters. And then together we were all collaborating on like, what is the actual storyline of this pilot? And that eventually became the pilot of the show.
I know pilots too can be, especially in fantasy settings, can be so intimidating because you're now establishing a brand new world. It's not like, you don't go, oh, New York, right? It's not like Statue of Liberty and everyone's like, I know exactly what kind of setting this is. You're like, here is this Moraine settlement. Like, how do you communicate Moraine settlement, Imperials, like a whole faction of people? Because, just because someone's flying a flag of a certain color, you have no idea who they are. So it's
yeah.
So
that's a really good point, and I want to make sure I address it, which is sometimes what people do is an info dump, as we know, and we call that exposition. But there's a way to do exposition that the audience wants and is demanding to have. So the best way to get across like the rules of the world or the context of the world is to put it in terms of a conflict between two characters. Like if I needed to establish that there was a jail in this town, I might have a character walk up to this building. It's like, look, I need to see my brother. You've got him locked up here for 3 years. You never let me in there. Like, no, you can't do that. Like, and create a conflict. And then the audience is getting like, oh, there's a jail in this town. They lock people up for years. They have no, they don't use due process or whatever it is. Or you could put it in the context of a mystery of like, there's somebody in that jail and no one knows who it is. And that person's been in that jail for years. And why don't anybody know why doesn't anybody know who it is? And really all I want to do as a storyteller is I want to tell you like, oh, the prince is in that jail and they're in that prince is in the jail because of XYZ reason. But you make the audience go like, yeah, who's in there? Well, I want to know who's in there. Tell me who's in there. Like, oh, it's the okay, it's the print. You want to create a need in the audience to get this information, so it's not just literally reading Wikipedia.
Yeah, I came up with I remember coming up with two thoughts because there are a lot of shows these days that sometimes open with that. Here's like the backstory, right? It's like the Star Wars scroll, like a long time ago in a galaxy far away. There is a bit of that kind of TV series where it's like you have the narrator at the beginning that's like, this was this in this Moraine settlement, and now the Imperials have come, and this is what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel like you probably can't get away with that anymore.
I did think of like the idea where it's like it's already in the middle, so it's already begun. So it's like Bard wakes up every day, and then assuming the Bard can sing. So my thought was instead of the Bard who can't sing, the Bard was singing. It's like I'm waking up, I'm doing my daily like activist Bard screaming into the void thing and clashing with the Imperials, and using that as an exposition point, being like things were so it's like things were better before you showed up and all of that.
Yeah.
There's also this pitch from Deb about
it's a great pitch.
Yeah. So like Casablanca moment.
Yeah.
And
what's nice about that, by the way, there was a lot of great pitches in here. One of the things that's nice about, or one of the things that's helpful, I will say generally, in a writer's room is when you have an example. So if you say, like Deb mentioned Casablanca, it's like immediately like there's a lot that I get out of that as, if I'm the showrunner, I'm like, oh yeah. I totally get that. Like I totally get what you're going for, what you're talking about with just that little bit of information. Like that's really cool. one of the things I like about it also is like it ties a lot of characters together even more. That's always good. The tighter you can weave that net of the characters, the better. Having, and the show is always the tip of the iceberg. So there's 90% under the water, like all the stuff that's happened in the past, whether that's about the artifact or about, a former lover or whatever it is. So all of that is really great grist for storytelling. But Peter, did you notice any that, I like this one a lot, the one from Deb. Were there any other ones that you thought sounded like they could work or...
This is the other one about the Imperials having rules about the bards needing a license, which I think would be interesting if, I think that the arrival of the Imperials definitely needs to affect the bards' like livelihood or prospects. I think that'd be a good external conflict for them to have to push back against. Yeah. There's something about the image of this bard, even whether they're a good performer or a bad performer, like being the person who's performing in the town square of a town of like 15 people is inherently funny.
Yes.
And I think tying that into this is their character who cares even when no one else cares. I think that to me, I like want to renew my pitch for because I'm excited about the idea. And again, I don't want to do the thing where like keep suggesting the same idea. I do think there's something about the main character being the only person who's like taking the threat of the Imperials seriously, who is like suspicious despite them making this like maybe warmer first appearance. And I really see like a first episode arc of them trying to convince the town that like no, we need to form ranks, we need to go shoulder to shoulder, like shield wall against them here, and trying to get that proof. And I wonder if the change in the character is less about steadfastness of belief and more about a change in tactics. And so the way they've been trying to like yell at the town or grab people by the lapels and shake at them or yell at them has been the wrong strategy. It's more a change in like their form of diplomacy or like needing to soften on their reasons for wanting the Imperials gone. Or
I love that. I think maybe what it could be is that the character exactly everything you said, and I think maybe the thing that the character learns is we are a united community, and this is actually going to tear us apart. So all the things we love about being here and being in this community, this crazy community, this circus-like community, are going to go away. We're going to lose it all, and we're all getting distracted by these great things that they're bringing, like the roads and the aqueducts and whatever, and the money they're bringing into town and whatever is great. But the bard recognizes it first. So this is piggybacking on everything you said. The bard is the one who notices it first because of the other pitch about the Imperials now have to establish an imperial type of community. So they have put in rules about permits. And the first person who needs a permit is that bard. And the first person affected, and everybody's like, great, maybe you won't play in town anymore. Like, you crazy busker. Like,
So then if I can pitch the change that they make to get people to take them seriously is they volunteer not to perform anymore. They're like, even if we get rid of them, even if we like reject their licensing system, I vow not to play for however long, like I'll shut up. And that's them like kind of proving that they're not in it for the personal reasons of like I feel slighted and that they're in it for the larger reasons of what's good for the town there.
I love it. So that means, great. Now we have our arc for the episode. So because we have a changed character, because of all the decisions that we all have made together and knowing where we want to end with the story and setting up our premise for the whole show and season, it feels to me then if the character's going to end that way, giving up their performances, therefore and that's going to be meaningful to the town. It's not just the town is happy that they want to hear him or her play. It's got to be a sacrifice.
I think the rival gets the slot. If there's another performer or someone else who like gets ahead because this person's kind of yielding their floor or their spot.
Yes, and it's a character's name is Swaler Tift. And
we did it. We got
had to bring it in. Yeah, exactly. That maybe the character then I would suggest has to start out loving playing for people. Like, this is the most important thing they do. They do their weaving, get it done, and then they get out there and they're busking and it's the most important thing in their day. And it's so meaningful to them that actually having to give it up is a sacrifice. And the town realizes like, oh, this character is willing to make that sacrifice. This is serious. So we can start out with that would be a fun character. I think we even have an opening, which is the character performing in the town, middle of town, and people are either ignoring the character or throwing things at the character, or like, haven't we heard this one before? Like, can you come up with a new song? Or And what we do secretly is we have this character singing a song that's about the artifact.
Right.
To start getting across some stuff, but we just think it's about seeing this character like, bombing essentially on stage, but still doing like keeping a smile, and keep continuing going. Like,
Oh my God!
I'll eat that later. Thank you.
Humor is the worst. Humiliation humor.
But if they seem comfortable with it, if it's like, again, like a Leslie Knope character who's like, nope, I'm not failing, you're just not appreciating me. Like,
exactly.
I think we can still root for them in that moment.
Yeah, an indomitable spirit.
Yeah. This is more of like the cringy embarrassment humor is like what it's like. I totally get it. I'm not disagreeing. It's just like I know my personal like high empathy, and I know Eric is like that too. Like when scenes like this happen, Eric actually walks out of the room.
But I think it's the difference between like The Office and Parks and Rec is like The Office doesn't necessarily care if its characters get hurt. And I feel like Parks and Rec lets them fail, but it still roots for them just in the core perspective of the structure. And I feel like we can do that for this character where like even if they're failing, they're failing in a way where we're rooting for them. Instead of it being like like watching Michael Scott die on stage doing like a racist bit feels very different from like Andy Dwyer performing a bad version of 10,000 Candles in the Wind or something. Like they play differently.
I totally agree. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't disagreeing or countering. I was just more stating my own visceral reaction to it.
And by the way, that's another good thing in the room is to, so often somebody will play the role of devil's advocate on any decision we're about to make. And I have one friend who like literally that's always what he would do. He would be like devil's advocate. And even if he didn't agree with it, he would just play that role for us. So we'd be like, oh. And then we either decide, no, it's fine, or wait, that's a good point. So it's important to have somebody who's willing to do that for the group because you can easily convince yourself something works when actually, if you really step back and thought about this other perspective, you might realize it doesn't. So it's always good to have that back and forth in a room. So, but I think this is great. Like I already can see, I hopefully, people watching and who participated can see we've, in a course of a short amount of time, and obviously you would have far many more hours to do this if you were on a show. We've kind of crafted something that using, random prompts to generate this, something that I could see the show. I actually would like to watch this show. It seems like I love fantasy. I like the idea that there's maybe a B story with these ex-lovers going on. An A story of this character like uniting the town, the underdog story. I love all these kind of crazy characters we might encounter who are driving each other nuts, but also working together, whether that's like Parks and Rec or Community or whatever. And we're following their story all over the course of the entire season. And even the Imperials we could have some fun with them. Like this is really reaching back, but I used to watch on Comedy Central when they only played reruns of old shows. I would come home from work when I was a teenager and I would watch Hogan's Heroes, which could be a really dark show, could have set in a Stalag in Nazi Germany, but it's a comedy. It's a single camera comedy, and the bad guys were funny too. So I don't think you could do that now, but the point is you can make your bad guys funny without taking away their power and their antagonism. So I could see that there could be a lot of fun on all sides of this show, but also have enough drama, and what we call rooting interest in these characters that like makes us know that they're flawed people, but really want them to like get together and figure things out and win and succeed. And maybe some of the Imperials will like change sides. Who knows? Or maybe vice versa. We don't know. But yeah, so I appreciate everybody participating and joining in, pitching some really awesome ideas and helping make our choices in terms of our cards. That's great. Me too. I love Hogan's Heroes. It's a fun show. And this was really great. I appreciate. I reached out to Peter and Maroki because I was using the cards, and I enjoyed them so much that I wanted to let them know, and that's how we kind of got in touch for the first time. So thanks for having me on the stream. It's really fun, and I watch the streams too, and I always get something out of them. So
we love that you love the cards in our streams, and like the conversations we had. I remember the very first time we chatted, and you just spoke about how you used all those decks and systems so eloquently. And it's I think it's really rare to actually like speak to someone who uses like who so comprehensively uses the deck in their work and get a chance to kind of have that conversation. It was actually like extremely warming and wonderful, probably the biggest form of flattery that I suppose anyone can ever get.
Plus,
well, I love them. So
yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share how you use the deck, for walking us through some tips and tricks for working in a writer's room, for adapting from writing novels and prose to writing scripts. I feel like there was so much excellent knowledge that came out. And remember, if you want to see more of George, George is a frequent guest on Dungeon Musings, which you can find at youtube.com/c/Dungeon Musings. We are the Story Engine deck. You can find us at storyenginedeck.com if you want to check out any of the decks that you saw in action today. Also, for both the current chat and for the replay crew, one thing that we wanted to make sure we didn't do during the live stream is name the show. So not in the chat, but in the comments. If in the comments you can give us some suggestions for what this show should be titled, we would love to hear that. So please leave that in the comments. We'll be revisiting those and possibly sharing some of our favorite selections either on social media or in the newsletter. So please give us your suggestions for that. And we will be back with the Story Engine Workshop Series next week with Chef Shane Chartrand, who is a Top Chef Canada semi-finalist, Indigenous chef. He's going to be showing us how to do, he's going to be talking about the intersections between culture, food culture, and world building. And we're actually going to try and build a fantasy culture inspired by Indigenous food principles, or whatever the cards have in store, or whatever Shane Chef feels like walking us through that day. I think it's going to be an incredibly fascinating live stream. So please join us in 1 week at 3 p.m. Eastern again. And until then, stay creative. And thank you so much to everyone for all of your contributions. This was an absolute delight. All right, we'll
Thanks
catch
for
you
being
next
part of the
week.
writer's room.
Bye-bye.